The Ironstone Isle, county fief under the Duchy of the Northern Sea, Kingdom of Ruby, Empire of Violet. The island, spanning nearly 10,000 square kilometers and ruled by the House of Ironstone, housed Ironstone Keep at its northernmost tip, which buzzed with unusual activity this day. The reason was plain to see. Old Count Ironstone had sustained wounds during the Continental Expansion War half a year prior, and passed away on the 1st of June, year 3000 of the imperial calendar earlier this month. As the title of Count was hereditary, upon the late Count's death, succession fell to his offspring. Rem Ironstone, the Count's eldest son and an Earth Knight, had received sanction from the Duke of the Northern Sea to inherit the title. Today marked his investiture ceremony. Nobles allied with the House of Ironstone, alongside 7 vassal viscounts and 43 barons under Ironstone's domain and numerous other guests, had all gathered within the millennia-old fortress to congratulate the new Count. Rhett Ironstone, the late Count's second son, also possessing the strength of an Earth Knight, was tasked with welcoming the visitors. Sir Rhett, you cut a striking figure today. Your ceremonial robes shine brilliantly. Count Thorn, I thank you for your compliment. Please, enter and take your seat. All guests treated Rhett with outward courtesy, addressing the untitled second son by the honorific Sir. Yet behind their bright smiles lingered tangled emotions, disdain, scorn, or quiet pity. What a waste. Both bore the power of Earth Knights. The elder brother would inherit the title, bound for endless glory. For the younger brother, once this day ended, he would most likely be forced to leave Ironstone domain. Rem Ironstone had never gotten along with his brother. No one expected him to let Rhett remain on the lands, much less generously grant him even the smallest baronial fief. Few paths lay open for Rhett, the Earth Knight. His Highness the Fourth Prince arrives. Moments before the ceremony commenced, the Duke's fourth son appeared, tardy. Strictly speaking, the Duke's children held no right to the title of prince. Still, among the realm's nobility, it served as a flattering form of address in private. Having his servants announce the title for all to hear demonstrated Rem's sharp grasp of noble etiquette. He was no hot-headed youth lacking foresight. The fourth prince's arrival signaled the start of the ceremony. Seated in the highest place, he delivered formal remarks on the Duke's behalf, then circulated to exchange pleasantries with every guest present. He even paused to speak with Rhett, seated at the furthest end of the table, perhaps feeling a kinship with another non-primary heir. He treated Rhett with greater warmth than the rest. After the small talk concluded, the fourth prince unfurled the Duke's official writ and presided over the investiture. The ceremony opened with prayer. Led by the bishop, all knelt in devout supplication, honoring the chivalric code they upheld and beseeching the protection of the ocean god. When the lengthy prayers drew to an end, the fourth prince climbed to the dais. He took the long sword offered by a servant, gripped its hilt, and rested the flat of the blade gently upon the right shoulder of Rem, who knelt on one knee. Witnessed by the ocean god, I dubbed thee Count by the sword. He shifted the blade to tap Rem's left shoulder once more. May you uphold loyalty, courage, justice, compassion, carry forward the name of Ironstone, and uphold the glory of chivalry. The blade lifted from Rem's shoulder and tapped lightly atop his thick, unruly brown hair. Do you accept this charge? Rem needed no persuasion. He bowed first in deference, then raised his head. Amid the bishop's chanting, he spoke his oath clearly and deliberately. The vow was lengthy, centered upon loyalty and chivalric virtue. Rhett stood among the crowd and paid it little heed. He felt like an outsider, and indeed, he was. He did not truly belong here, nor even to this world. He hailed from another realm, an ordinary yet remarkable place. Now, he was merely a displaced soul inhabiting another man's body. Once, this body and identity had belonged to Ironstone Keep. After today, he would have no home left. His celebrated elder brother was almost certainly already plotting to drive him from the domain. At last, the drawn-out oath ended. Rem received the sword signifying martial merit and the medal of authority. He pressed a respectful kiss to the back of the fourth prince's hand, loyal and unwavering. Count Rem. The ceremony concluded. Thunderous applause and cheers erupted. Rhett clapped his hands reluctantly. When the commotion faded, Rem raised his hands to quiet the assembly. I am deeply grateful for every gentleman gathered here to witness and celebrate my ascension to the title of Count. I look forward to standing alongside you all through prosperity and hardship, in service to the Duke of the Northern Sea. He delivered another lengthy speech of thanks and pledges of allegiance. Once he finished, he smoothly continued. My father fathered many children, yet only my dear brother Rhett and I have come of age, with all of you and His Highness the Fourth Prince as witnesses. I would take this chance to speak of my dear brother's plans. Red had long anticipated Rem would move against him the moment he claimed the title and felt no surprise. He could not help but admire his brother's careful wording. My brother's plans made it sound as though every decision ahead came from Red himself, not from Rem. I had intended to grant him a baronial title, entrusting him with governing Alfalfa Town. Yet he declined, declaring his wish to journey to the Northern River Province to pioneer new lands in service to the duchy. I could not bring myself to refuse. Pioneer new lands? Rhett nearly cursed aloud. It was little more than a death sentence. The Northern River Province was no safe haven. Lying on the duchy's far northern frontier, it was territory claimed only in recent expansion. Rumors spoke of constant raids by merfolk. Though resentment burned within him, Rhett could not protest. Even if he shouted that these were not his wishes, no one would believe him. Between the words of a ruling count and those of a landless second son, every noble knew whose version would be accepted as truth. I shall withhold formal noble rank, yet provide him supplies to support his frontier endeavor. The assembled nobles voiced their approval, praising Rem's generosity and hailing Rhett for his bravery. Hold a moment. To everyone's surprise, the fourth prince cut through Rem's noble rhetoric. Sir Rhett, service to the duchy need not mean frontier pioneering. I have vacancies for household knights within my retinue. If you would accept. This was an open offer of patronage. A household knight serving a prince was no dishonorable station. For landless young knights without inheritance rights across the duchy, it was a coveted opportunity. Though the prince was not the primary heir to the duchy, he would almost certainly earn a county of his own in time. To serve as one of his sworn knights meant that with battlefield achievements, a baronial title was well within reach. The nobles watched on with curious expressions. Rem's fingers tightened around his sword hilt, then slowly relaxed. I thank your highness for your generous offer, yet I have set my heart on this undertaking. He appreciated the fourth prince's timely goodwill, but he had plans of his own. Preparations for the frontier expedition await my attention. I shall take my leave. With those words, Rhett strode out of the great hall. He needed to depart Ironstone Domain without delay. The fourth prince's invitation would have stoked his brother's suspicions. If he lingered for days, Rem might well act to eliminate the threat Rhett posed forever. The sooner he left, the safer. As for the supplies Rem had promised, he would not hold his breath. Returning to his chambers, he tucked a 1,000 gold banknote he had amassed over the years inside his tunic. Taking nothing else, he marched outside. Carl saddled 2 horses. Carl was his manservant, who had served him since childhood, left to Rhett by his late mother. He was the only loyal ally within Ironstone Keep, and Rhett intended to take him along. They are ready, young master. Your plate armor and sapphire longsword are secured upon the saddles. Carl was meticulous. Having served Rhett for years, he understood his master's predicament and had guessed what lay ahead. Well done. Rhett nodded approvingly. We ride for the docks at once. The two galloped to the harbor, where Steward Soth waited outside, clutching a wooden casket. Soth answered to Inanna, Rem's birth mother. Young master, as you prepare for your journey, my lady feared you would grieve for your mother. She has arranged for her remains to be moved from the family burial ground. This holds her ashes. Soth extended the casket with a sneer, atop which rested another banknote worth 10,000 gold coins. My lady knows you embark on frontier pioneering. This gold is to aid your venture. The unspoken message was clear. The gold was hush money. Rhett was expected to keep the desecration of the grave secret, and never inform his maternal grandfather, Marquis Red Crab. Rhett pinched the banknote between 2 fingers, his face impassive. Inanna believed she had him trapped. Frontier colonization demanded vast funds, and she assumed Rhett could never turn down 10,000 gold coins. But she miscalculated. She underestimated Rhett's resources. And more importantly, the depth of affection Marquis Red Crab held for his daughter and for Rhett himself. It was understandable. To avoid political friction and spare himself sorrow over his lost daughter. Alongside his lingering resentment toward the late Count Ironstone, the Marquis had not set foot on Ironstone Isle save for her funeral. He offered Rhett no public support. To the uninformed Inanna, this absence must have read as indifference. That was why she dared commit such a foolish act, driven by resentment toward Rhett's mother and bitterness over her own rise. From secondary consort to lady of the keep, she had desecrated the grave to vent her anger. Rhett erupted in rage. He tore the banknote to shreds. With a sharp scrape of steel, his sword cleared its sheath. Soth's head tumbled to the ground, rolling to rest at Rhett's feet. Without a second glance, Rhett brought his boot down. The head burst like a smashed melon. Foolish to provoke an Earth Knight. Soth had brought his fate upon himself. The order of knighthood, from lowest to highest, ran, Apprentice Knight, Full Knight, Earth Knight, Sky Knight. A separate rank existed for Dragon Knights, though this denoted a bond with a dragon rather than a tier of martial prowess. Within the duchy, an Earth Knight counted among the realm's elite warriors. Soth was merely a commoner, who had dared provoke Rhett relying solely on Inanna's favor. He had sealed his own fate. Several knightly attendants had accompanied Soth, each possessing the skill of a full knight. Faced with Rhett's unbridled fury, they dared not intervene. They wheeled their horses and raced back to deliver word of what had transpired. Carl took the ash casket from Rhett's grasp. No fear showed on his face, only quiet sorrow. Within rested the ashes of the gentle, admired daughter of a marquis, the woman who had once saved his life, the kindest soul he had ever known. Rhett stood amid the biting sea wind, steadying his roiling emotions. He pulled a horn from his tunic and lifted it to his lips. A resonant blast carried far upon the ocean breeze. "Young master, a ship. I see a ship." Moments later, Carl spotted a large sailing vessel emerging over the horizon and cried out in joy. It was the ship from Red Crab Isle, arranged in advance between Rhett and his grandfather. As the sails drew closer, Rhett recognized the man waiting aboard to meet him, his maternal uncle, Count Pero Red Crab, a high Earth Knight. "Little Rhett, come aboard." Pero was easygoing by nature. He had not noticed the casket Carl held. Had he learned it contained his younger sister's ashes, he might have sailed straight for Ironstone, to seek vengeance without delay. Rhett said nothing for the moment. Noble alliances and rivalries were tangled, and Ironstone domain was far more complex than it appeared. Furthermore, the Duke had issued strict edicts forbidding unauthorized warfare between his vassals. Angry as he was, he would not let his uncle act recklessly and risk losing his title to the Duke's justice. He would speak of everything once they reached his grandfather. The Marquis would find a fitting resolution. From the moment he stepped onto the ship until Ironstone all vanished over the horizon, Rhett never looked back. There was nothing there worth clinging to. Pero sensed his nephew's low spirits and refrained from prying, though his gaze drifted toward Rhett repeatedly. Normally talkative, he struggled to contain his curiosity. When he spotted Rhett pull out an ancient bronze compass, he could hold his tongue no longer. "Little Rhett, the crew knows these waters well. You have no need for a compass. Besides, who crafted this thing? Bronze makes a poor compass housing. It cannot guide you. Compasses need lodestone." "I know that, uncle. But this compass was never meant to chart directions." "What? A compass that doesn't find the way? You haven't taken ill, have you?" Rhett's reply left Pero thoroughly confused. Convinced his nephew was unwell, he hurried off to summon the ship's physician to examine him. It took considerable effort for Rhett to persuade his uncle otherwise. He appreciated Pero's concern. No one at Ironstone Keep had ever cared whether he was sick or healthy. Still, he had spoken the truth. This compass served an entirely different purpose. He stared down at its face. Lines of script visible only to him floated above its surface. No sprite worms detected within a 10-li radius. Unlocked sprite worm varieties. 0 upon unlocking varieties. Related sprite worm flora may be purchased. Sprites and dragons were the twin pillars sustaining this world, and the foundation of noble power and prestige. Dragons were the source of mineral wealth. Beyond ordinary iron and copper ore, all high-grade magic-infused minerals and gemstones originated from these magical creatures. Those who forged a bond with a dragon became Dragon Knights. The title of Dragon Knight served as the threshold to dukedom and the highest tiers of nobility. Sprites were less rare than dragons, yet divided into distinct tiers. While a small number possessed unique abilities, the rest formed the backbone of the realm's agriculture. All magical potions used by knights and mages were cultivated under their care. The tiers of sprites were dragon sprites, greater sprites, lesser sprites, and sprite worms. The lowest tier, sprite worms, spontaneously spawned from plants. They lived for 10 years, and with sufficient fortune could evolve into lesser sprites. Lesser sprites survived 50 years, and might advance into greater sprites within that span. Greater sprites boasted a lifespan of 200 years. A greater sprite was the cornerstone of power for nobles of count rank and above. Ironstone Domain derived its two greatest sources of wealth from such assets, the red iron ore veins that gave the isle its name, and its alfalfa greater sprite. The alfalfa greater sprite tended nearly 1,000 acres of alfalfa potion crops, yielding profits that even surpassed the iron mines. The sprite had ascended to greater sprite status 150 years prior, at the founding of the house. It had 50 years of life remaining. If no new greater sprite emerged within that window, Ironstone Domain's prosperity would inevitably decline. Without the vast gold earned from alfalfa potions to fund armies and sworn knights, Amid an empire that valued military achievement above all else, holding onto the county title would grow uncertain. But none of this concerned Rhett. It was a problem for the new count at Ironstone Keep to solve. The compass he carried was the power he had gained upon crossing into this world. Its foremost ability was to locate sprites and sprite worms. As yet, he owned not a single sprite worm, so its full capabilities remained locked. Even limited to searching a 10-li radius for sprite worms, it was already an artifact of immense value. The cheapest sprite worm sold for no less than 1,000 gold coins. 1 gold coin exchanged for 100 silver coins, or 10,000 copper coins. A single copper coin purchased a pound of black bread. A strong adult slave cost merely a dozen silver coins. The numbers spoke plainly to how precious sprite worms were. With this compass, he could live comfortably merely by tracking down and selling sprite worms. That was only a hypothetical, however. A man ought to strive for greater things. With his own formidable martial skill, he dreamed of carving out a legacy of his own. He stood quietly on the deck, gazing out over the choppy sea, lost in thought. At that moment, a teal saltwater fish leaped from the waves and crashed back into the water with a splash. Inside Ironstone Keep, guests still lingered in the outer halls, yet Rem, the newly invested count, had retreated to his private study. Such an early departure defied etiquette, but news just delivered demanded his immediate attention. 2 reports had reached him. First, his mother Inanna had ordered the desecration of a grave and the removal of remains. Second, Red had slain Steward Soth, the man she had sent to confront him. The night's account sent Rem into a rage. He stormed back to the study, smashing furnishings the moment he stepped inside and faced Inanna. He did not seethe over Soth's death. Knights lived by codes of honor and pride, especially an Earth Knight such as Rhett. Under those circumstances, Rhett had only killed the steward. He could have marched into the keep and held a blade to Inanna's throat, yet he had restrained himself. What truly infuriated Rem was his mother's short-sighted, reckless act. The grave belonged to the youngest daughter of Marquis Redcrab. Regardless of whether the Marquis still grieved for her, disturbing a tomb was an insult to the honor of House Redcrab, and honor mattered above all to noble families. Now, to preserve his dignity, House Redcrab would demand an explanation. Then there was his dear younger brother, Layan Rain. Originally, he had planned to expel the youth from the family. Naturally, if Rain perished on the border, it would be a welcome accident. His scheme ought to have worked flawlessly. Even if Rain managed to establish a foothold in the borderlands, the two would merely maintain hostile relations. Moreover, this was standard practice during power transitions. Many eldest heirs suppressed their siblings after inheriting titles, a common occurrence within noble circles. By sending Rain to the border, others might call him harsh, yet even the Marquis of Redcrab could find no fault with his actions. But his mother's reckless interference had broken all established customs, turning both the Marquis of Redcrab and Rain into mortal enemies. Above all stood Rain. The Marquis of Redcrab possessed vast holdings and would exercise restraint in his moves. Rain, however, was different. He had no family left, no ties to hold him back. To make matters worse, Rain boasted extraordinary talent. An 18-year-old Earth Knight was a rare sight across the entire Northern Sea Principality. He dared not imagine what havoc an enraged, unrestrained Earth Knight could wreak upon their house. Still, what was done could not be undone. Regrets served no purpose. Clearing up this mess was his top priority. Summon someone, Rem said in a deep, heavy voice. At his command, a figure clad in black emerged from the room's shadows, their features obscured. Keep watch over Lady Inanna. From now on, aside from supplying her food and lodging, every request she makes, especially any order to mobilize knights, must receive my approval before being carried out. Publicly execute all servants and knights involved in the grave desecration on charges of manipulating the lady and plotting treason. Sever their heads, seal them alongside Soth's remains, and send them to Red Crab Island. Release the barley sprite bound to our house and dispatch it there as well. I shall pen a personal letter to the Marquis of Red Crab to explain everything. Also send word to the governor of North River Province. Instruct him to assign Rain's pioneer fief to the province's outermost reaches, bordering the fishfolk territories. Rem paused briefly before issuing one directive after another. My lord, shall we dispose of Rain directly? The black-cloaked man suggested coldly. Attend to your assigned tasks, Rem replied, his tone edged with frost. A foolish notion. The nobility's connections were tangled and far-reaching. Having only just inherited his earldom, countless eyes watched him in secret. Under such circumstances, he dared not bear the infamy of slaying his own brother. Besides, Rain was a formidable warrior, quietly assassinating him would prove no simple feat. The optimal plan was to settle his fief near the fishfolk, letting the aquatic people eliminate him. Even if the fishfolk failed to kill Rain, their constant harassment would prevent him from securing stable ground. As you command. The black, cloaked man dared not utter another word and withdrew, overcome with deference. Red Crab Island lay nearly 1,000 li away from Ironstone Fortress. Though they sailed aboard large vessels, the voyage consumed almost 5 days. It was dusk on the 5th day when Red Crab Island appeared on the horizon. The setting sun bathed the entire island crimson light. Legend claimed the massive landmass resembled a giant crab with outstretched pincers, hence its name. Red Crab Island was 5 times the size of Ironstone Island, and it served as the seat of House Red Crab, one of the 5 hereditary Marquis families of the Northern Sea Principality. Dock at the southern pier. When the fleet stood merely several li offshore, Perrault designated their landing point. The southern pier offered the shortest route to the family citadel, Red Crab City. A troop of knights awaited them on the shore. His maternal grandfather, Ackerman Red Crab, had not come, yet his maternal grandmother, Lady Violet, arrived in person to greet her grandson. The old lady was over 60 years of age, but she maintained her appearance well, looking vigorous, gentle, and kind. Her temperament, however, stood in stark contrast to her demeanor. She was notoriously impatient. Catching sight of her grandson, who bore a striking resemblance to her daughter, her eyes instantly grew watery. She hurried forward and grasped Rain's hands. "Oh, my little Rain, my poor fledgling. How joyful I am to see you." After voicing her emotion, she kissed Rain's cheek, overflowing with concern. "The last time I saw you was 5 years ago. You've grown so much. That cursed golden-maned lion cub, driving you out like this." The Earl of Ironstone possessed brown hair akin to a lion's mane, so the old lady always referred to him as that detestable lion. The lion cub naturally meant Rem. The elderly woman chattered endlessly, and Rain cut in promptly, greeting her with a smile. "Grandmother, you look just as youthful and lovely as you did 5 years ago." "Oh, little Rain knows just what to say. Far better than that stodgy old oak of your grandfather." Following a brief exchange of pleasantries, she pulled Rain toward a carriage bound for the citadel. She insisted on riding alongside him. It violated established etiquette, yet the old lady was stubborn. At times, not even the Marquis could sway her once she set her mind to something. Rain had no choice but to comply. Truth be told, he had never held much regard for such noble formalities anyway. "Grandmother, how fares grandfather's health?" The question lit the fuse for another string of complaints. The old lady tightened her silk handkerchief in her grip. "My dear boy, you have no idea about that old crab." A few days passed. He insisted on proving he was still vigorous. He headed to the paddocks to test his mettle against a fierce steed. The moment he swung himself into the saddle, that unruly young horse tossed him neatly onto the ground. That rusted sewing machine of a lower back of his took a nasty knock from a stone. Now he remains confined to his chambers, poring over those tattered scrolls of his. "You will see for yourself once we arrive." She recounted the tale with vivid animation, her words full of dry wit, yet Rain dared not laugh. The old man had a fiery temper in his advanced years. If he learned Rain mocked him, he would undoubtedly beat him with the flat of his sword. "Enough talk of him. Little Rain, I hear you intend to become a pioneer." "I do, grandmother. I have been assigned to open new lands on the border." Alas, frontier territories are fraught with danger, full of hideous fishfolk. Learning her grandson was bound for border pioneering, the old lady's worry spurred another lengthy stream of rambling. She talked without pause until the carriage rolled inside the citadel gates. Red Crab's citadel spanned nearly 1,000 mo. Aside from its buildings, the rest of the grounds were planted with all manner of magic herbs, tended by sprites. Yahoo! As Rain stared admiringly at the flourishing magical flora, a delicate, winged creature shaped like a porcelain doll hurtled straight toward him. Miller, one of House Red Crab's 3 greater sprites, was the youngest, around 30 years old. Her symbiotic plant was the magic rose, an exceptionally precious magical herb. Rain gazed upon the beautiful creature with undisguised envy. Sprites took different forms as they matured. Sprite worms appeared as finger-long, jade-white worms, acting purely on instinct. Upon reaching lesser sprite stage, they gained rudimentary human features and limited intelligence, yet remained incapable of speech, no bigger than 2 fists. Only upon advancing to greater sprite did they take forms like Miller, standing nearly 50 centimeters tall, blessed with sharp intellect and the ability to speak. A greater sprite could nurture nearly 1,000 mu of magic herbs. 1,000 mu held close to 2 million rose bushes. Even selling raw herbal material at the lowest rate of 1 silver coin per plant yielded 20,000 gold coins in revenue. That represented only a conservative minimum estimate. Magic roses were premium magical herbs, and great noble houses retained their own alchemists. Once these roses were refined into potions, their value would multiply tenfold or more. Such was the power of a greater sprite. This was why nobles counted the quantity and quality of their sprites as symbols of status. These creatures truly possessed the capacity to sustain entire noble households. Little Rain, I'm hungry. Miller recognized Rain, and her sharp memory clearly retained their previous meeting. Miller's defining trait was her insatiable appetite. Whether hungry or not, she would pester others for food. Sprites fed on jade dust, powder ground from magic-infused jade. Though not as priceless as gemstones forged by dragons, this magical jade remained a rare and valuable commodity. 1 kilogram of jade dust cost a single silver coin, far from cheap. Nobles usually carried jade dust on their persons. At noble gatherings of any scale, sprites were always present, and offering treats to guests sprite worms was a common, pleasant social custom. Naturally, Rain carried jade dust with him. He unfastened the silk pouch hanging at his waist, scooped a generous spoonful, and set it onto Miller's outstretched tiny palms. Thank you, Little Rain. You are such a good boy. Sated, Miller thanked him in a tone akin to an elder, then fluttered away on her wings. Servants and knights tasked with guarding her departed alongside her. Sprites possessed no combat power, so nobles always assigned dedicated caretakers to safeguard these precious beings. After bidding Miller farewell, Rain followed Pero through unobstructed corridors until they reached the bedchamber of his grandfather, Marquis Ackerman. House Red Crab boasted numerous kin, yet most held separate fiefs, leaving the citadel quiet and empty. Rain saw none of his cousins. Is that Rain come to call? Enter. Before he could knock, a resonant voice echoed from within the bedchamber. Though advanced in years and weakened by time, the Sky Knight Marquis could distinguish footsteps outside his door with perfect clarity. Inside the opulent bedchamber, the gray-haired Marquis wore his favorite naval officer's uniform from his days serving the royal fleet. His hair was neatly combed, and at his hip hung a knight's sword set with sapphires. The blade had been bestowed upon him by the king when he and the current Northern Sea Grand Duke served together as royal naval magistrates. Embedded within it was a ruby taken from the ruby dragon of the Ruby Kingdom. It channeled magical energy to boost striking power, while also standing as a token of the king's favor and recognition, a symbol of rank and prestige. He had dressed formally to receive Rain, the gifted young Earth Knight, as a mark of respect. This was respect between knights, a bond of honor that transcended blood ties. Knowing Rain wished to speak privately with the Marquis, the others tactfully withdrew to prepare the welcome feast. Only Rain stepped through the doorway. Seeing his grandfather's formal attire, he immediately understood. He bowed in a courteous gentleman's salute. Lord Ackerman Red Crab, Marquis of Red Crab Island, former superintendent of the Royal Third Fleet. Greetings to you, my beloved grandfather. Ha ha ha, well spoken. A fledgling eagle ready to spread its wings. It gladdens me to see you, my dear Rain. Like many elderly men, the Marquis appreciated greatly when younger generations knew of his youthful exploits, and Rain's greeting won his immediate favor. After exchanging formal greetings, the two took their seats. They skipped trivial domestic chatter. The Marquis wisely avoided asking after events at Ironstone Fortress, and Rain tactfully refrained from mentioning the embarrassing fall that had injured his grandfather. No sooner were they seated than they moved straight to important matters. Have you fully resolved to become a pioneer? I have, Rain nodded. There was no reason to hide it. He had traveled to Red Crab Island in hopes of securing assistance. The Marquis nodded approvingly. Unlike his wife, who fretted constantly, he admired Rain's courageous resolve. Examine these. From between stacked volumes on his desk, the Marquis drew out 2 opened letters. Rain took them and read carefully. One letter originated from Ironstone Fortress, penned by his elder brother to offer explanations and apologies regarding the grave desecration incident. The second came from House Red Crab's spies stationed within North River Province. Its contents concerned Rain. Word had spread from the governor's mansion the previous day that pioneer knights would no longer be permitted to select their own frontier lands. I have looked into this affair. It is plainly directed against you. The governor of North River maintains close ties with Ironstone Fortress. That golden-maned lion cub intends to assign you to the most dangerous frontier reaches. Having lived a long life, the Marquis was well acquainted with such underhanded noble schemes and quickly deduced the motive. He is still young. His methods lack subtlety. The Marquis watched Rain's expression closely. Seeing no trace of fear, his approval deepened. He slid a rolled parchment map across the table, depicting North River Province. See the area circled in red? Rain unrolled it. Near the province's western edge lay an island marked with crimson ink. The isle took the shape of a rounded rectangle. Judging by the map's scale, it spanned roughly 150 square kilometers, comparable to the territory of a sizable township. This is an exclave belonging to Red Crab Island. It was settled long ago and later abandoned. The house never sent one of our kin to claim it. Several thousand commoners still dwell there, and its location lies deeper within the province, relatively far from the border. I intend to transfer it to you as your pioneer fief. The land has already seen initial development, with an established population. Pioneering there will prove far less arduous, and most importantly, it is comparatively safe. Thank you, grandfather. I shall take that land. Rain's heart surged with joy. This was an unequivocal offer, a ready-made township situated in a safer zone, the ideal pioneer territory. With this holding, he could evade the trap laid by Ironstone Fortress and the provincial governor. He could ask for nothing better. Very well. Make your preparations. When do you depart? I plan to remain on Red Crab Island for several days before setting off. He certainly intended to stay longer. He needed to use his compass to search thoroughly for wild sprites undiscovered by House Red Crab. If he found any, he suspected the Marquis would not demand their return, given his character. So be it. With their business settled, Rain chatted with the Marquis for a time. The older man recounted tales of his youth for the most part, and Rain offered timely words of admiration and surprise. Upon leaving the Marquis's bedchamber, before the welcome feast began, Rain took Carl to inter his mother's ashes within House Red Crab's ancestral cemetery. At last, she had returned to her ancestral home. The Marquis said nothing of what action House Red Crab would take over the incident, yet Rain guessed he would merely pressure Ironstone Fortress to extract greater concessions and nothing more. The Marquis loved his youngest daughter, yet occupying such a lofty position, he could not act purely on personal sentiment. Moreover, Lady Inanna herself hailed from a branch of House Red Crab. Though her father lacked ruling authority, his title was legitimate, and he maintained decent relations with the Grand Duke. Given such connections, demanding lives and retribution was utterly impossible. He would have to bide his time. He owed vengeance for Lady Inanna's act of grave desecration, as well as Rem's plot to end his life, but not now. The welcome banquet commenced at dusk. Attendance remained modest. He was merely a junior family member, and Red Crabkin scattered across their fiefs would not travel back solely for his sake. Still, the atmosphere was lively. Both grandparents appeared in formal attire. The old Marquis looked ruddy and drank generously. Rain, too, was offered copious mugs of fine vintage wine, though its alcohol content was mild, leaving him completely sober. The celebration stretched late into the night before the guests dispersed. Rain was assigned chambers adjacent to the Marquis's own for his stay. Early the next morning, Rain set off in simple traveling clothes, accompanied only by Carl. They headed for Red Crab Citadel stables, where he claimed 2 scaled blue steeds bred by the Marquis, infused with monster bloodlines. Today he planned to tour several large manors, farms and village holdings directly administered by Red Crab Citadel outside the city. His primary goal was searching for wild sprites. If he could capture several to bring to his frontier fief, they would greatly aid the development of his domain. Before departing, his uncle Pero offered to assign a troop of knights as his escort. Rain declined. To speak plainly, fewer than 20 people on Red Crab Island surpassed him in strength. Besides, if he encountered foes even he struggled to defeat, a handful of knights would make little difference. Bringing a retinue would only draw unwanted eyes and hinder his objective. He chose to take only Carl. The man had willingly abandoned Ironstone Fortress to follow him to the harsh, dangerous border, and had proven trustworthy. Young master, which manor shall we visit first? Carl had obtained a map from the Citadel steward, marking dozens of manors large and small across the surrounding region. Find an estate where no spirit worms dwell. Spirit worms were territorial by nature. Fields already under the influence of one spirit worm would seldom attract another. There's Peanut Hamlet not far from here. We'll head there. He spared a casual glance and settled on the destination. It was all a shot in the dark anyway. Any place would do. Rain mounted his horse first. Steeds blessed with monster blood tended to be fiery-tempered, and as a stranger, Rain met immediate resistance. The scaled blue horse pawed at the dirt and twisted its body, trying to fling its rider off its back. An ordinary man would have struggled greatly, but Rain was an earth knight. No horse could best him. He brought 4 fingers together, bent them, and pushed his middle knuckle forward, rapping 2 sharp knocks against the horse's skull. The impact sent a dull, grating sound echoing from the steed's head. Struck by knuckles as heavy as iron nails, the scaled blue horse neighed in agony, tears streaming down its face. Having tasted pain, the horse quickly understood it could not defy the man atop it. It resigned itself to being ridden and stopped struggling. Carl followed suit. Carl served as his personal manservant. Ordinarily, he would never have had the chance to tread the path of the supernatural or cultivate knightly battle aura. But Rain knew his own fate well. He had long accepted he would be driven from Ironstone Castle once he came of age. He had sought out awakening potions and breathing techniques to guide Carl onto the road of power. Perhaps it was the last trace of paternal affection lingering within the old Earl of Ironstone. He chose not to investigate the matter too closely, turning a blind eye, and allowed Rain to claim double shares of cultivation resources. Carl was now a high formal knight, yet he stood at the threshold of advancing to Earth Knight. To break through, he would need a great stroke of fortune or years of quiet refinement before he could ascend. Rain suspected his mother had chosen Carl with great care. The young man possessed remarkable talent. To reach the rank of high formal knight at 18 marked him as a genuine prodigy. This achievement was all the more impressive within the Duchy of the North Sea, a poor, resource-scarce realm where more than 90% of its territory lay beneath the waves. 2 more sharp knocks, and Carl's mount likewise grew compliant. "Let us ride." At his shout, Rain galloped forward, with Carl close on his heels. 2 magnificent steeds carried the pair of young men toward the pale morning light, crushing dewdrops clinging to weeds along the country path, leaving a trail of dust billowing behind them. Peanut Hamlet was no tidy, picturesque manor. It was a settlement home to common tenants and serfs, its farmlands split into scattered, disjointed plots. It resembled a fully self-sufficient village. Nearly 100 households, more than 500 people, resided within its bounds. It occupied inland territory on Red Crab Island, close to Red Crab City. The land held little danger, so no knight was stationed here. Security fell to a village militia of fewer than 20 men, organized by the locals themselves. The castle sent only a single administrator to live permanently in the hamlet, tasked with collecting annual taxes and settling ordinary civil disputes. No advance notice had been sent, so the hamlet was unprepared when Rain arrived. Houses clustered in the village center, encircled by farmlands stretching outward. Though it bore the name Peanut Hamlet, only half the fields grew peanuts. The rest were planted with rye, alfalfa, beans, and other crops. The moment he stepped onto the edge of the farmland, Rain could barely contain his excitement, the corners of his mouth lifting uncontrollably. Fortune smiled upon him. Luck had truly favored him. The very first location he picked at random already held a spirit worm. The compass in his hand glowed with faint misty light, projecting a map covering a radius of 10 li. A pale blue dot blinked in the center of a field at the map's edge. Detected a developing peanut spirit worm. Location marked. Spirit worm varieties unlocked. 0 upon unlocking. Related plants to the spirit worm's host plant may be purchased. Young master, where shall we go next? Carl grew confused when Rain suddenly halted and stood motionless. Rain returned to his senses. Eastward. I believe we will find something precious there. I feel the guidance of the goddess of fortune. He had no idea whether gods truly existed in this world. Yet worship of the goddess of fortune was widespread across the Duchy of the North Sea. Churches dedicated to her could be found in every city and large town. Most of her followers were ordinary commoners, trapped in ignorance by the times, who dreamed of divine favor granting them an easy life. Nobles and knights, however, held broader vision thanks to their monopoly on knowledge. They placed little faith in unseen deities. Instead, they trusted the swords in their hands and gold coins filling their purses. They chased only knightly glory, battle honors, titles, and territory. As a newcomer to this era, Rain did not believe in phantom gods. Still, he had no better excuse to explain what he intended to do. After some thought, he resolved to attribute it all to an unprovable divine omen. If Carl doubted his claim of divine guidance, he could question the goddess of fortune himself. As you wish, young master. You are always right. Carl likewise held no belief in divine guidance, yet his duty as a servant dictated his master could never be wrong. He raised no objection. The two rode along the narrow paths outside the village, drawing the gaze of numerous villagers. Word quickly reached the hamlet administrator. By the time Rain reached the peanut field marked on his compass, an elderly man with a stooped frame yet sharp spirits hurried over. His hair was neatly oiled, and he wore well-tailored garments. Greetings, young knight, and your valiant attendant. I am the administrator of this hamlet. I apologize for my intrusion, yet I must ask for your identity. It falls within my official duties, and I hope you will understand." The administrator stopped a short distance before the horses, straightened his attire, and offered a gentle gentleman's bow. Rain understood. As the hamlet's overseer, it was only natural he would verify the identity of unfamiliar strangers. Carl, quick-witted, handed Rain a bronze medallion belonging to the Marquis of Red Crab, obtained before they departed the castle. This token guaranteed them free passage across all of Red Crab Island. Rain dismounted and nodded in greeting. "Greetings, Administrator. Your diligence is admirable." He held out the medallion. "This bears the seal of my maternal grandfather, the Marquis of Red Crab. It proves my identity." The instant the medallion appeared, the administrator's doubts vanished. "So you are an honored guest of the Marquis. Forgive my earlier presumption. Allow me to offer you my sincerest regards once more." He bowed deeper, in a far more respectful gesture. After straightening, a warm smile spread across his face, and he asked somewhat awkwardly, "Sir Knight, might I humbly request to examine the medallion? Please do not misunderstand me. I do not question your identity, nor the authenticity of the token. I merely wish to behold this artifact that embodies the Marquis's honor and knightly glory, a treasure rarely seen." It seemed the administrator was a loyal admirer of the Marquis, eager to view the noble's personal possession. "Of course, Administrator. You may examine it as long as you wish until I take my leave." Permission granted, the administrator's eyes lit up with excitement. "I thank you for your generosity." He pulled a neatly folded cloth handkerchief from his chest pocket and carefully wiped his hands. Pausing, he still deemed it insufficient. He retrieved a brand new handkerchief from another pocket, spread it across his palms, and carefully took the medallion up, shielded by the fabric. He studied it closely for several seconds before returning it, fully satisfied. "Administrator, please disperse the onlooking villagers. I have matters to attend to here." From the moment he arrived at the field, crowds had gathered to watch. There was no pressing need to hide his search for the spirit worm, yet he disliked being stared at like a spectacle in a traveling circus. Clearing the crowd would make things far simpler. "It shall be done at once." Now aware of Rain's status and granted the privilege of viewing the Marquis's medallion, the administrator complied wholeheartedly. As a member of the lesser gentry who had governed Peanut Hamlet for many years, his words carried great weight among the villagers. Before long, only Rain, Carl, and the administrator remained. Freed from prying eyes, Rain felt much more at ease and stepped forward into the peanut field. The administrator glanced down at his polished leather boots, then at the soft, damp mud of the field. He hesitated briefly, then steeled himself, stepping into the soil with a frown. Drawing on the sharp senses of an earth knight, Rain quickly spotted the peanut plant emanating magical energy amid rows of nearly identical seedlings. Tucked beneath its leaves rested an egg-sized flower bud, easily overlooked if one did not look closely. Yet after examining the plant, his brow furrowed. The seedling lacked all the healthy signs of a spirit worm host. Starved by poor soil, it had stunted growth, and its magical aura was faint and weak. He suspected that had he arrived a few days later, the developing spirit worm would have perished from malnutrition midway through its gestation. This explained why spirit worms were so rare. These delicate creatures would easily die if undiscovered. Even those that successfully emerged could fall prey to birds or succumb to harsh environmental conditions. Carl and the administrator remained confused, unable to fathom why Rain had journeyed out to the farmland. Only when Rain knelt beside one peanut seedling, brushed aside its leaves, and revealed the enormous bud did realization dawn on them. Shock swiftly followed, along with overwhelming joy. "Heavens, young master, could this be a developing spirit worm?" Carl's voice trembled with excitement, his hands unsure where to rest. The administrator was equally stunned, yet being a seasoned, cunning man, he recovered quickly and offered his congratulations. "You are truly blessed by the gods, Sir Knight, to discover a spirit worm in such barren farmland. I would never have believed it possible had I not witnessed it with my own eyes." The evidence spoke for itself. Rain did not answer Carl's question. He turned, spirits lifted, his tone bright. "Carl, bring me the jade powder." Jade powder served as nourishment for spirit worms, rich in magical energy, produced steadily and available at a comparatively reasonable price. Carl pulled a small cloth sack holding roughly half a pound of jade powder from his tunic and presented it with both hands. Rain took the sack. Instead of using the silver spoon inside, he scooped up a handful and scattered it evenly around the seedling's roots. The magic-infused powder would replenish the plant's nutrients. "Carl, you are to guard this place without interruption until the spirit worm finishes gestating." "At once, young master. Rest assured, I shall not let my attention wander for a moment. Carl stood, saluting with solemn resolve. Very well. I am grateful for your efforts, Carl. After encouraging Carl, Rain turned toward the administrator. Before he could speak, the administrator took the initiative. Have no fear, Sir Knight. I shall aid Knight Carl in guarding it as well. His promise was no empty gesture. He hurried back to the village, recruited villagers to build a shelter beside the field, even donating several prized hides he had kept in storage. He sent peasant women to fetch chickens, fresh milk, and white bread from the village, personally arranging regular meals for Carl. While the group in the peanut field busied themselves caring for the developing spirit worm, Rain declined the administrator's invitation to lunch and rode off toward another village. The discovery of the peanut spirit worm marked a promising start. He hoped to find more spirit worms by visiting additional hamlets while his luck held. Knight Carl, the spirit worm appears close to emerging. I wonder if Sir Rain will return in time to witness this memorable moment. The administrator carefully inspected the bud housing the spirit worm once again, his 35th check that day. Though an administrator, he had never witnessed a spirit worm's birth, and curiosity drove him to constant observation. He also feared mishaps might occur, so he never strayed far from the spot. It was no small feat for a man of 50 to stay awake for 2 successive nights, dark circles forming beneath his eyes. Thunderous hooves echoed in the distance as they talked. Moments later, a blue-haired rider galloped to the edge of the field. It was Rain, travel-worn and weary, yet his mood was somewhat subdued. Over the past 2 days, he had ridden tirelessly between dozens of hamlets, yet found no second spirit worm. Sir Rain, you arrived just in time. The spirit worm is about to emerge. The administrator carried a mug of fresh milk forward, offering it to quench his thirst and updating him on the spirit worm's state. Carl soaked a cloth in warm water, wrung it half dry, so Rain could wipe the dust of travel from his face and hands. Thank you. Rain had ridden nonstop for 2 days without drinking. Though his Earth Knight physique suffered no ill effects, the sight of fresh milk stirred his desire to drink. He accepted the mug and drained it in one gulp, then took the cloth to clean his face before walking into the field toward the host plant. Compared to 2 days prior, the seedling had transformed completely. Its foliage grew lush and vibrant green, and the magical pulse emanating from the bud had strengthened greatly. The bud trembled faintly. The administrator's prediction was correct. The spirit worm would soon complete its gestation. Estimating it would take no more than an hour or 2, Rain dragged over a chair and settled down to wait. Roughly an hour passed, and blood-red twilight spilled across the horizon. Crack! A faint rustling sound came from within the bud. Rain heard it at once and stood excitedly, stepping close. Carl and the administrator drew near as well. As if responding to their anticipation, the unopened petals of the large bud unfurled one after another. Magical energy from the surrounding area surged rapidly toward the patch of earth. Pop! At last, the innermost petals opened wide, revealing a worm as long as a finger. Patterns resembling peanut blossoms marked its back, giving it the appearance of polished pale jade. What a magnificent creature, Carl murmured, watching the newborn spirit worm intently. Though it resembles an insect, it carries such grace and refinement. One cannot feel the slightest revulsion toward it. Rain admired the creature for a moment, and his earlier gloom faded entirely. All his days of travel had been worthwhile to obtain this beautiful being. He took a pinch of jade powder, touched it to his fingertip, and gently held his hand out toward the spirit worm resting upon the bloom. The newborn creature had expended great energy breaking free from the bud. Sensing the tempting jade powder, it perked up and crawled toward Rain's finger. It sank its mouthparts into his skin. His fingertip broke open, and the spirit worm swallowed a mixture of his blood and jade powder. The instant the drop of blood was consumed, Rain felt an intangible bond form between himself and the small creature. The pact sealed. The spirit worm released his finger, drawing close to nudge his skin, before climbing along his finger to settle upon his palm. Rain lifted his hand and stroked the spirit worm's back lightly with the pad of his other index finger. Its body felt cool and soft to the touch, a pleasant sensation. After sharing this quiet closeness, Rain instructed the spirit worm to withdraw its host plant. The host plant, the seedling that nurtured the spirit worm, shared an unbreakable bond with the creature. They lived and died as one. If one perished, the other would not survive long after. The peanut spirit insect received its command. As soon as it was placed back onto the cordyceps plant, it opened its maw and drew in a breath. The peanut seedling beneath it transformed into a streak of green light that streamed straight into its mouth. The cordyceps could be transported. While on the move, the spirit insect would store the plant safely within its body. Once they reached the relocation site, it would spit the cordyceps out, allowing it to take root and grow once more. As the cordyceps vanished, the spirit insect began to fall. A split second before it hit the ground, Layan reached out and caught it. He set it into a magic jade casket Carl had prepared long beforehand. The casket was carved from the same magic jade or used to make jade dust, the ideal dwelling place for spirit insects. He tipped a measure of jade dust inside to serve as the creature's nourishment before closing the lid and stowing the box securely. You have labored tirelessly these past few days, Magistrate. Only after securing the spirit insect did Layan beckon the magistrate over. To avoid any appearance of impropriety, the magistrate had stepped away after catching a brief glimpse of the spirit insect emerging from its bloom. He well understood how valuable spirit insects were to nobility and dared not linger nearby, fearing he might incur Layan's displeasure. It is no hardship at all. To render even minor aid as you claim the spirit insect is an honor. I must thank you for granting me the chance to witness such a marvelous creature's emergence with my own eyes. The magistrate waved his hands repeatedly, unwilling to accept Layan's thanks. Nonsense, good sir. You have lent invaluable assistance these days. As a token of my gratitude, I intend to reward you personally with 10 silver coins, and you must accept them. Layan carried no small change, so he turned to Carl to borrow 10 silver coins alongside 50 copper coins. The 10 silver coins were for the magistrate. The 50 copper coins would go to the farmer who owned this peanut field. This was no reckless display of wealth. There were two clear reasons behind his generosity. First lay an ancient noble tradition. Whenever a lord discovered a spirit insect, custom dictated rewarding the local magistrate and landowner. Such acts of benevolence invited continued favor from fortune, increasing the odds of finding more spirit insects. They also encouraged common folk to promptly report any plant resembling cordyceps they chanced upon. Second, Carl had stayed 2 full days and nights here. The magistrate had supplied him with all he required and performed his duties faithfully, deserving proper recompense. Moreover, they had pitched tents and wandered freely across the peanut fields, trampling many seedlings and causing losses to the landowner that ought to be compensated. That said, he would offer the farmer no excessive sum, only 50 copper coins. Too generous a payout would bring misfortune to the commoner rather than aid. 50 copper coins could buy 50 pounds of black bread or 150 pounds of rye grain, more than enough to cover the damaged crops. Deliver these 50 copper coins to the field's owner and offer him my sincere apologies on my behalf. Seeing that Layan would not be dissuaded, the magistrate accepted the payment with hesitant gratitude. I thank you for your generosity. Then farewell, magistrate. Farewell to you both, noble knights. May fortune watch over you. Have they left? A bed constructed from stacked stones and planks held a thin straw mattress, its fabric worn pale from repeated washing. Upon the mattress lay a man in poor health, his skin rough and chapped, his face crisscrossed with deep wrinkles. No onlooker would have guessed he was barely 30 years of age. He tucked his injured foot beneath the covers and spoke quietly to his wife, who tended a crude stove less than 1.5 meters away. What she called porridge was little more than a pot of water dotted with a few wild vegetable leaves and sparse grains of wheat that could be counted one by one. Not yet. Perhaps tomorrow they will depart. His wife did not lift her gaze, her attention fixed on the flickering stove flames. I went to check. Many peanut shoots have been trampled. Silence settled thick over the cottage once her words faded. A long sigh escaped the husband, followed shortly by another from his wife. Bang! Bang! Sharp knocks suddenly rang out, and the magistrate's familiar loud voice echoed through the door. Come quickly. Good fortune has arrived for your household. The man could not stand with his wounded foot, so his wife wiped her palms on the hem of her tunic and opened the door. Help me carry these inside, quickly. The magistrate did not step across the threshold. Instead, he gestured for several villagers to haul 3 half-filled sacks into the cottage. The lords from the city trampled your peanut crops these days. They offered copper coins as compensation. I took the liberty of exchanging the coins for wheat, enough to feed your family for many months. With that, the magistrate led the villagers away. It took the woman a long moment to fully grasp his words. She hurried out into the yard to call after him, yet she only caught sight of his distant, receding silhouette. Neither she nor the magistrate noticed a figure slip away within the shadowed recess beside the far cottage. Any news? On the dirt road leading out of the hamlet, Layan waited for Carl's return. All is settled, young lord. Carl nodded toward Layan. It seems our magistrate is an honest man. Layan smiled. I suppose it is time we head back. Recalling the coins he had borrowed from Carl earlier, Layan pulled a gold coin from his tunic and tossed it over. Repayment. He then let out a light whistle and rode forward ahead of Carl. There is no need for repayment, young lord, yet I thank you for the gift. Carl urged his mount to follow close behind. Layan's whistle faltered. He understood Carl's meaning. Speaking of repayment between them felt far too formal. I had no intention of paying you back. Consider it a reward. Young lord, you are truly a gracious and noble gentleman. Beneath the last fading glow of the sun, the two horses trotted side by side, their hooves striking the ground in a steady, cheerful rhythm. They reached the castle deep into the night. Once in his chambers, Layan lost no time retrieving his compass to study its properties. No unclaimed spirit insects detected within 10 li. Unlocked spirit insect. Peanut insect available plant varieties for purchase. Peanuts 1,000 gold coins per set of 100 plants. Varieties selected at random, guaranteed free of spirit insect infestation. Compass rank. Grade 1 contract 1 minor spirit insect to advance rank. Unlock next ability. Purchase spirit insects of varieties you have already discovered. As Layan read the glowing projection of text, overwhelming joy tugged his features into an involuntary grin. Before forming a contract with a spirit insect, the compass had only served to locate them. Now a new function had appeared, the ability to purchase plants of the same kind as cordyceps. Nobles across the realm had long since discovered that exposing spirit insects to plant pheromones matching their cordyceps variety accelerated their progression toward evolution and moderately raised their chances of successful transformation. Naturally, whether evolution ultimately succeeded still depended heavily on luck. The compass's first power made locating spirit insects far simpler. This second power paved the path for his spirit insects to advance. The price of 1,000 gold coins for a single plant variety was steep, yet the guarantee that the plants would be free of spirit insect infestation made the cost somewhat worthwhile. Even more thrilling was the third ability awaiting him upon the next rank. That power would let him buy spirit insects directly. It meant that with sufficient gold, he could obtain an endless supply of spirit insects and even choose their varieties. In this world, where spirit insects formed the foundation of agriculture, these abilities represented immense power, capable of laying the firmest foundation for his domain's growth and prosperity. He mulled over the three functions late into the night, too excited to fall asleep until the wee hours. The next morning, fully prepared, Layan went straight to see the Marquis. He reported his travels of the past few days and informed his grandfather that he planned to set off the following day. It is only right you depart. This is the southern stretch of the Cadro province. Between here and your destination lies the Rinsa province, home to Ironstone Fort. The journey will take no less than half a month, leaving you little time to spare. Per the duchy's laws, once an exploration claim was registered, a deadline for arrival was set based on distance. Rinsa province bordered the northern river province, where new territories lay. The deadline allowed 1 month to reach the region. Only those who arrived within that window could claim their initial pioneer lands and receive their official exploration charter. Anyone who missed the deadline forfeited their claim entirely. Shortly after the old earl's passing, his elder brother Rem had filed the exploration application on Layan's behalf on the 1st of June. Messages traveled by Harrier Hawk, swift as the wind. The notice reached the Northern River Provincial Governor's Hall that same evening, and the formal approval returned the next day. That meant Layan had to arrive by the 1st of July. The old earl was laid to rest on the 3rd. Rem inherited Ironstone Domain on the 5th, and Layan departed immediately. He traveled 5 days to reach Red Crab Domain. Counting today, he had stayed here 3 days. Tomorrow would be the 14th. With another 10+ days of travel across the provinces, he would arrive right on schedule. My young fledgling, as your grandfather, I wish you safety. As the hereditary marquis of this duchy, as a knight, I bid you be brave and carve out your own legacy. The marquis rose, resting a hand upon Layan's shoulder as he spoke earnestly. His tone soon shifted. Beyond the minor spirit insect you already know of at Ironstone Fort, I have secured rights to several offshore isles. I intended to give you that minor spirit insect, alongside 4 additional spirit insects. Layan accepted the 4 spirit insects without hesitation, yet declined the minor spirit insect. For the moment, he wished to accept nothing originating from Ironstone Domain. His grandfather had already aided him greatly, and he could not bring himself to take the minor spirit insect as well. Minor spirit insects were scarce across Red Crab Isles. Though his grandparents, uncles, and aunts would raise no complaint, what would his cousins think? Many among them had received no spirit insects when granted their coming-of-age lands. If an outsider such as himself took one, Gossip would surely spread. Words carried weight, and he had no desire to strain his bond with his grandfather's family. Very well, I shall not press you. Young Leon, head to the training grounds behind the castle. I have selected a retinue for you. Go and meet them. The Marquis watched Leon's resolute form, briefly overcome with nostalgia. He bore such a striking resemblance. The same blue hair, blue eyes, that unyielding stubbornness. Yet no flicker of emotion crossed his face. He stood tall and straight until Leon stepped out of the chamber. Only then did the Marquis slump forward, brushing moisture from his eyelashes. Red Crab Fort had once been an elaborate garden, filled with rare exotic flowers and plants gathered from every corner of the fallen empire. Yet the reigning Marquis of Red Crab, Leon's grandfather Ackerman Red Crab, deemed ornamental flora a useless luxury, a knight who valued martial merit above all else. He ordered the garden level to build a training ground spanning 1,000 mu. Many of Red Crab Isle's finest young knights had honed their skills upon this field. A solemn, disciplined air hung over the grounds. Even bearing the Marquis's official insignia, Leon faced multiple checks and identity verification before he was permitted entry. Within the training grounds, a line of young knights clad in silver plate armor with swords at their waists stood assembled in the open central square. At a glance, there were 12 men in total. These were the retinue the Marquis had chosen for him, to accompany him to the border frontier and become his first trusted followers. Hail, my lord! At Leon's approach, the lead knight stepped forward, removing his helmet and bowing. The rest of the knights followed suit. Per imperial custom, fully armored knights need only dismount, remove their helms, and offer a nod or bow to their liege and superiors. Kneeling was not required. After swearing fealty, knights would often kneel of their own accord in daily life as a display of loyalty. No trace of reluctance lingered in the knights' eyes at the prospect of pioneering on the remote border. Instead, anticipation shone clear. Their gazes toward Leon held reverence and admiration. The man before them, their future liege, was among the duchy's youngest Earth Knights. As fellow knights, they had long heard tales of his prowess and admired him deeply. To serve a gifted knight on a frontier expedition was an opportunity they embraced wholeheartedly. If they served faithfully, once their lord attained noble rank, his followers would likely receive rich rewards and perhaps earn noble status themselves. When the Marquis sought volunteers for Leon's retinue, more than 100 knights had stepped forward. These 12 had won their places through rigorous competition. Leon did not carry himself with arrogance. He inclined his head gently. Brave knights, my comrades, thank you for choosing to follow me, for leaving your homes to journey to the border at my side. We would gladly lay down our lives for our lord. Moved that their liege offered them respect with a bow, the knights dropped to their knees as one. My loyal guardians, will you swear fealty to me? The atmosphere was charged, the young men filled with passionate resolve. Leon's own heart stirred, and he voiced the question calling for their oath. At his words, every knight drew their sword and held it upright before them, setting their helmets upon the ground and sinking to one knee, heads bowed. By fortune's witness, I, Leo, I, Roll, I, Laura, I swear with my life to fight for the man before me, to uphold the duties of a knight and the code of chivalry, to pursue knightly glory. Where his blade points, there I shall go. His honor shall be my destiny. His lands shall be my charge. If I break this oath, may my sword rust and my soul shatter. Leon drew his own blade, tapping the shoulder of each knight in turn, and spoke solemnly. By the power of this sword, beneath the light of knightly honor, I, Leon, accept your fealty. We shall share glory and hardship, never to be parted. Once the oath concluded, Leon personally lifted each of the young knights, barely older than himself, to their feet. His experienced I could tell they were all mid-rank full knights. They lacked the abundant resources he and Carl enjoyed. So to reach such strength at roughly 20 years of age spoke volumes of their natural talent. Gazing at these carefully selected warriors, Leon felt deeper gratitude toward his grandfather and a flicker of unease. He feared he might fail to live up to the Marquis's expectations. Return to your quarters and prepare. We set off at dawn tomorrow. As he and his grandfather had agreed, the knights' families would travel alongside them. Though he had no wish to doubt the loyalty of men willing to risk everything on the frontier, human nature was unpredictable. It was wise to take precautions. Bringing their families to the border would serve as an added guarantee of their devotion. That evening, a farewell banquet was held within the castle. Grandmother Violet held his hand and shared many heartfelt words. She offered to send a retinue of maids and cooks to attend to his daily needs. Yet he declined gently. The border was a dangerous, unsettled region. Bringing unarmed servants would only burden the expedition. Besides, he had no taste for idle luxury. When pale lights spilled across the horizon, Lay-In arrived at Red Crab Isle's southern dock. A three-masted vessel, 40 meters long and 11 meters wide, lay anchored at the pier. The Purple Grape. When I first marched alongside His Majesty to campaign on the mainland, this ship carried wine to the frontline soldiers. The king himself bestowed its name. It was my very first vessel. The Marquis had come to the dock to see him off. Looking upon the ship steeped in old glories, he was overcome with sentiment. The vessel was built as a merchant craft with 7 decks. It carried no cannons, though mounting points had been left for future armament. Though advanced in years, it had been meticulously maintained, with many components replaced and refurbished. It could not match the warships of the royal fleet, yet it stood among the finest merchant vessels afloat. Rest assured, beloved grandfather, I shall care for it well, and bring it to sail once more across the northern waters. Lay-In understood how much this ship meant to his grandfather and made the promise to comfort the nostalgic old man. Well said. The Marquis laughed heartily at his words and clapped a heavy hand on Lay-In's shoulder. Set sail, my fledgling. May you spread your wings and soar in the northern frontier's new lands. I await word of your triumphs at Red Crab Castle. All lengthy farewells had been exchanged at the banquet the night before. No more words were needed now. Lay-In boarded the Purple Grape alongside the 12 knights. Raise anchor. A second vessel, the Red Crab, would accompany them to the frontier. Once they reached Lay-In's pioneer territory, the Red Crab's crew would ferry the sailors from both ships back home, leaving the Purple Grape and its passengers behind. Though the Purple Grape now belonged to Lay-In, the original crew would not remain. He would have to recruit and train new sailors to man his ship. The Marquis had originally intended to assign a permanent crew to serve Lay-In. Yet not a single sailor volunteered to travel to the Northern River Province. Having served in the royal fleet, the Marquis treated his sailors with great respect and refused to force them against their will. Lay-In took the setback in stride. Now that he possessed a ship, he believed gathering a crew would not prove insurmountable. Hoist sail, steer steady, hold course. Amid resonant orders from the helmsman, the Purple Grape pulled away from port. On board traveled Lay-In, Carl, the 12 knights, their families, attendants, nearly 100 souls in all, alongside 100 tons of wheat. Grandmother Violet waved a silk handkerchief until the ship faded into the distance. Only then did she lower her hand and dab the corners of her eyes with the fabric. Once the ship cleared the harbor and Red Crab Island faded over the horizon, Lay-In summoned his 13 knights. Now that he commanded these knights, a leader needed to be appointed. He named Carl captain, though he would hold off selecting a vice-captain until he could further judge who was best suited for the role. Carl was a high-rank, fully-fledged knight, and his promotion to captain sat well with the rest. At 18, he was 2 years younger than most of them, yet his superior strength spoke volumes. Lay-In stepped to the center and clapped his hands gently. Men, we face 15 sunrises and sunsets of rolling ocean ahead. Boredom will creep in, so I have a task for you all. At the mention of a mission, every knight hardened their expressions, as if marching toward a great battle. Speak, my lord. Your enthusiasm is commendable, Lay-In acknowledged before continuing. As you well know, these sailors are not in our permanent service. Once we reach our destination, they will depart, leaving our vessel abandoned on the beach to weather, wind, and sand, a costly loss for us. Therefore, I charge you, for the remainder of the voyage, to build rapport with the crew. Seek out the captain, navigator, helmsman, bosun, and other senior hands. Watch their work closely, ask questions, and learn every skill you can. We understand, the knights replied firmly. Whatever order their lord gave, they would carry out wholeheartedly. Then get to work. I await your good news. Leaving the cabin, the knights exchanged glances and scattered, each seeking out sailors to befriend. Nearly half of them, however, headed straight for the captain. Back inside his cabin, Lay-In took out a jade casket and opened it. Inside rested 5 silken, ribbon-like sprite worms. Besides the peanut worm he had already bonded, for more lay within: the barley worm, alfalfa worm, red rose worm, and tomato worm. These 4 had been sent to him by the Marquis, each only bound once before. A sprite worm could be bonded a maximum of 3 times in its lifetime. The first 2 bonds could be broken without harm, but the third bond was permanent. Forcibly severing it would kill the sprite worm instantly. This rule created wide variations in their market price. Unbonded virgin worms fetched the highest sums, with value steadily dropping after each successive bond. A thrice bindable worm that had already endured 2 packs sold for barely half the price of a virgin worm. Naturally, Many other factors shaped their worth: remaining lifespan, the strain of worm, vitality, and more. Prices varied widely, yet even the least desirable specimens never went for less than 500 gold coins. He daubed jade powder across his fingertips and performed the bonding ritual with each of the 4 sprite worms. Their second bond was now spent, leaving them with only one remaining pact. He fed the newly bound worms more jade powder and stowed them safely away once more. Then he opened his bronze compass, and the glowing projected script shifted. No unclaimed sprite worms detected within 10 currently bonded sprite worms: peanut worm, tomato worm, alfalfa worm, barley worm, rose worm. Available plant purchases: peanuts, tomatoes, alfalfa, barley, roses. 1,000 gold coins for 100 specimens of a single species. Varieties are random and guaranteed to be strains untouched by sprite worms. Compass rank: Level 1 Bond 1 Juvenile Sprite Worm to Advance rank. Unlocks next ability. Purchase sprite worms of varieties you have already unlocked. 5 plant varieties were now available for purchase, yet just as before, he could afford none. He possessed merely 1,000 gold coins, the initial starting funds for his territory. He dared not squander it frivolously. For the immediate future, cultivating sprite worms through purchased plants was out of reach. He would have to wait until his territory developed viable industries generating steady gold income before pursuing that goal. Fortunately, even without bought crops, he could seek out these plant varieties himself across the northern marches, so his sprite worms could gather pheromones. All of that, however, would have to wait until he laid the foundational framework for his territory, passed the duchy's inspection, and secured noble rank. His colonization warrant was valid for only 1 year. Should he lose the territory or perish within that time, the warrant would be revoked immediately, and he would forfeit all rights as a colonizing knight. Simply clinging to the land and hiding from sea beasts without progress was not enough. Within 12 months, the colonizing knight had to develop the territory to meet minimum standards. A detailed list outlined every requirement. Once those benchmarks were met, he would submit an application to the duchy's inspection corps stationed in the provincial capital. Inspectors would conduct open and covert investigations. Only after confirming the settlement was firmly established along the border would they issue a permanent colonization warrant, marking the land officially and irrevocably his. Securing the permanent warrant was merely the first step. Next came attaining noble rank. Title could not be earned through territorial development alone. It demanded military accomplishments satisfying strict criteria. Still, the requirements for nobility along the border were far more lenient than within the duchy's inland heartlands. That explained why, despite a mortality rate exceeding 60% for frontier colonizing knights, countless men still rushed to seek their fortune here. Noble rank was the most precious, valuable asset in this world, the essential key to entry into the upper tiers of aristocratic society. Life at sea lacked the varied sights of land travel. The endless stretch of blue water grew monotonous. Aside from tiny specks of distant islands drifting past on the horizon, the scenery rarely changed. By the 10th day at sea, Lei-Yin was thoroughly bored. As usual, he climbed to the uppermost deck, leaned against the gunwale at the ship's edge, and breathed in the sea wind. In his hand rested the ancient bronze compass. These days, he rarely let it leave his grasp, constantly scanning it, hoping to detect a new sprite worm. The knights and sailors could not fathom his fascination with a compass that could not chart direction, and wild rumors circulated among the restless crew. One of the more plausible guesses claimed the compass was a gift from the Marquis or his mother, and he stared at it endlessly out of longing. His thoughts drifted with the rolling waves, his gaze wandering aimlessly, until it fell upon the compass. In an instant, his focus snapped back, surprise lighting his eyes. Hard aport, Lei-Yin projected his voice with battle aura. Though he did not shout, the sound carried clearly across the vessel, heard by all 70 crewmen aboard. The helmsman jumped in shock, nearly losing his grip on the helm. Years of experience let him regain control quickly, but the ship lurched violently. Reckless outburst. The captain of the Purple Grape was a stocky, weathered old man standing beside the helmsman. He had watched as Lei-Yin's sudden shout nearly triggered disaster. A slipped helm carried grave risks. Luck prevailed now, with calm seas causing nothing more than a lurch. In stormy weather, if the vessel met waves at an angle, a lost helm would swing the rudder hard, spinning the ship broadside to the swell. At best, violent rolling and flooding across the deck would follow. At worst, the waves would capsize her entirely. Moreover, the Purple Grape's helm was long. If it whipped free unchecked, it could easily break a helmsman's arm. Decades of seafaring taught him how narrowly catastrophe had been avoided. Relief quickly curdled into sharp anger toward Lei. Muttering a curse, he strode toward the rail to reprimand the presumptuous young noble. He had only taken a few steps when Lei walked straight toward him. Sir Lei, a man unused to ocean travel can scarcely comprehend how close we came to disaster just now. Naturally, nobles raised in comfort know little of the dangers of sailing. I do not deny your kinship to the Marquis. Yet I must warn you, while I command this vessel, navigation falls under my authority. Do not toy with the lives of every soul aboard by shouting out absurd sailing orders. Lei had intended to explain his need to alter course, yet he was met with this sharp rebuke before he could speak a word. The old man is truly irascible, he thought. Still, he realized his sudden command had sparked conflict. He overlooked the captain's lack of courtesy and kept his tone amicable. Captain Bert, there is a misunderstanding between us we can resolve. But right now, I need you to turn the ship to port. This is of great importance. Captain Bert had hoped his reprimand would quiet the blue-haired youth. Yet Lei still sought to interfere with navigation. His temper flared openly. No, there is no misunderstanding. Sir, I warn you once more. If you do not wish to spend your evening resting on the seabed, cease meddling with navigation. His tone bordered on outright insult. Insolent. Who dare speak to my lord in such fashion? Imperial law permits immediate execution for disrespect toward nobility. The commotion drew onlookers, including Carl. Seeing his lord sharply berated by a common sailor, Carl's temper ignited. The gentle, reserved manner he usually showed around Lei vanished entirely. His knight's sword cleared its sheath in a flash of silver, and in the next heartbeat, the blade rested against Captain Bert's throat. His speed was astonishing. No one aboard besides Lei tracked the full motion. Impressive. His skill continues to advance, Lei mused silently. He had seen every movement Carl made and could have halted him effortlessly, yet he chose not to intervene. Even the most patient soul has limits. Lei had spoken gently and offered compromise, extending every courtesy a noble might grant. Still, Bert refused to listen to a single word of explanation. Hard aport. Now, Lei's tone hardened. He preferred kindness, yet he would not hesitate to wield decisive authority against those who grew insolent. Do you not hear him? My lord orders hard aport. Carl repeated coldly. The captain was stubborn to the last. Even with steel pressed to his neck, his face remained stony and unyielding. Hard aport. The navigator saw the tension spiral. Further stalemate would end in bloodshed. He scanned the open, deep waters surrounding them, judged a turn safe, and issued the command himself. Hard aport. The order echoed, repeated loudly by the watch. Feeling the vessel swing to port, Lei turned and tapped Carl's arm, signaling him to sheath his blade. I shall record this incident in my letter to my grandfather. With that line, he walked toward the port rail. Carl resheathed his sword with a grim expression and followed closely behind. Captain, once Lei and his knight departed, the navigator approached Bert anxiously. Hierarchy and duty were strictly observed aboard ship. He had overstepped his rank by issuing a direct order bypassing the captain. Such an act could be treated as mutiny. Petty captains had thrown men overboard for far less. The navigator trembled, overcome by hindsight fear. Yet Captain Bert appeared unruffled. He pulled the wineskin from his belt, poured a splash of liquor into his palm, and dabbed it onto the shallow cut the sword had left on his neck. You did the right thing. Thank you. The navigator noticed the captain's hand shook faintly as he spoke. Only then did he recognize that this hardened veteran of decades at sea was shaken, terrified by what had nearly transpired. Bert was indeed afraid. With sharp steel resting beside his jugular, one small shift would have ended his life and sent him to meet the sea god. In that terrible moment, he recognized his own recklessness. He had forgotten his station, forgotten the vast divide separating common folk and nobility, lulled into arrogance by years of generous treatment from the Marquis. Only with a blade at his throat did he grasp how perilous his outburst had been. Perhaps when this voyage ends, I ought to retire. Fetch a length of rope. Lei told Carl to tie one end to the ship and cast the rest over the gunwale. He also grabbed a small landing net. Then he leaned over the rail and stared down at the sea. Sailors and knights gathered to watch, whispering among themselves. Most chatter centered on the earlier confrontation. They thought their voices quiet, yet with the hearing of an Earth Knight, every murmur reached Lei clearly. He heard many divided opinions, yet chose to ignore them all. Suddenly, Lei, motionless beside the rail, moved. Gripping the rope with his left hand, he vaulted over the railing and slid downward. When he hung less than 50 centimeters above the waves, his right arm swept the net. The mesh skimmed the surface like a dragonfly touching water. Then it rose again in an instant. A surge of strength in his left arm hauled him upward. He soared like a hawk and landed steadily back onto the deck. The whole sequence unfolded so swiftly that most onlookers had not yet registered what happened. "My lord, are you unharmed?" Carl rushed forward a heartbeat later, overcome with worry. He trusted his lord's prowess, yet fear still gnawed at him. "I am perfectly well." Leyen grinned, staring at the tiny creature curled inside the net. A coral worm? By all accounts. He spotted one drifting in the ocean currents. His eyes are sharper than any falcon's. When the crew saw what rested within the net, gasps and stifled cries rippled across the deck. Word spread quickly that Sir Leyen had hauled a coral worm from the sea. At last, everyone understood why he had demanded the ship alter course earlier. "My lord, could you truly receive visions from the goddess of fortune?" Carl recalled his lord making similar remarks back at Peanut Village. He had dismissed it as idle talk at the time. Now, barely any time later, Leyen had found another sprite worm seemingly out of nowhere. What astounded him most was that Leyen had known exactly where the coral worm lay long before shouting the order to turn. "You may believe so if you wish, Carl," Leyen replied with a smile, offering no clear confirmation. He took out jade powder and completed the bonding ritual with the coral worm. Strictly speaking, coral worms qualified as sprite worms, yet they were utterly unique. They possessed no tears and could never advance. They were the only variety disconnected from agriculture, lacking even a host plant. Though long-lived, they could only be bonded once. They produced no crops. Their sole purpose was to settle in a suitable stretch of ocean and form a coral reef spanning 1,000 mi. That was their great power, to forge new islands beneath the waves. Born from ocean silt, they drifted along currents until they found an ideal location. Thereupon they sacrificed their own life to birth a reef island. They favored large land masses such as Red Crab Island. Each year, dozens of wild coral worms ended their journey along its shores. They formed new reefs that expanded the island's territory by more than a dozen square kilometers annually. Drifting unseen amid ocean currents, they were incredibly difficult to catch. Only the fishing fleets of great nobles occasionally hauled one aboard by pure chance. They could be bound, allowing their master to choose where and when they transformed into land, and even influence the shape of the new island to a degree. Wealthy nobles valued them highly to expand and reshape their coastal territories. In the North Sea Duchy, a maritime realm where land was more precious than gold, and bonded coral worms commanded extraordinary prices. They often exceeded ordinary sprite worms and easily sold for 1,000 gold coins on the open market. Still, Leyen had no intention of selling this specimen. He would carry it to his territory, where it would create 1,000 mu of fertile farmland for his impoverished settlers. What a benevolent lord he is. After concluding the pact, Leyen sent everyone away and returned to the cabin. Since the compass had been able to detect the coral worms earlier, it acknowledged these special spirit insects. He was eager to find out how the compass's ability to sell plants would function with these unique spirit insects that lacked symbiotic plants. Hurrying back into the cabin, he pulled out the compass. No unclaimed spirit insects detected within 10 currently unlocked spirit insects: peanut worm, tomato worm, alfalfa worm, barley worm, rose worm. Plant varieties available for purchase: peanut, tomato, alfalfa, barley, rose. 1,000 gold coins for 100 specimens of a single variety. Varieties are random, guaranteed to be strains untouched by spirit insects. Available for purchase: coral worm. 1,000 gold coins per specimen. Compass rank: Tier 1 contract. 1 minor spirit insect to advance rank, unlocking the next ability. Purchase spirit insects of already unlocked varieties. Excellent. Leyen silently praised the compass, acknowledging how intelligent his golden finger was. Being able to directly buy coral worms was another capability of immense importance for his territory's development. This meant the scarce land resources of the island realm could be expanded almost endlessly on his lands. The only catch was that he needed vast sums of gold coins. Ugh, when all is said and done, I still need to figure out how to earn that cursed gold. Oh great gods, send your devout follower a dragon that excretes gold coins. For the rest of the voyage, Leyen spotted no more spirit insects, so he no longer interfered with the ship's planned route. As the vessels carried no bulk cargo, their journey proceeded faster than expected. In the early hours of June 28th, they arrived at North River Island. The island was on the southern side of North River Province and only half the size of Red Crab Island. It also served as the provincial capital, housing the mansion of the North River Marquis, governor of the province. This place was the beating heart of the new territories conquered by the duchy over the past dozen years. The North River Marquis, one of the 7 marquises of the duchy, had begun his career tending the Grand Duke's horses. Of course, tending one's liege's horses was no dishonorable station. Horses were invaluable to nobles, especially those who had earned their rank through military merit. Only the most trusted confidants were permitted to care for a lord's war horses. Yet the North River Marquis had held no fief previously, merely an honorary lordship. That changed 15 years ago, when the crown issued an edict for the North Sea Duchy to conquer new lands and seize this territory from the merfolk. The province earned its name from a continuous east-west island chain stretching across its north-central region, winding like a river. Conquering new lands was only the first step. Settlers needed to be dispatched to guard the borderlands, the territory carefully developed. Scattered bands of merfolk needed to be hunted down to secure full control. If the duchy undertook this task alone, it would consume endless time and manpower. Following established custom, an official decree was issued across the realm, summoning pioneer knights to develop the frontier. It was accompanied by a series of favorable policies. The edict applied to everyone within the duchy. Anyone with sufficient strength, mercenary companies, destitute nobles, younger sons from great lordly houses could travel to claim frontier lands. The decree proved tremendously effective, drawing countless fortune-seeking adventurers willing to risk everything. After 15 years of development, the frontier boundary now stretched close to the first major island chain. A governor was needed to oversee provincial development, so the Grand Duke appointed the honorary Marquis as governor of North River Province. Effectively, the territory had been entrusted to him. Once frontier development concluded, the vast majority of these pioneer knights would become vassals of the North River governor. This was terrible news for Leyen. The North River governor maintained extremely close ties to Ironstone Keep. It was the old Count of Ironstone who had lobbied powerful nobles commanding Sky Knights to back the Marquis, securing him the governorship. To put it plainly, Ironstone Keep and the North River Marquis were firmly allied. Leyen knew he would inevitably face obstruction during frontier settlement. The fleet docked at the northern harbor of North River Island. Though they had sailed up from the southern inland waters, and the southern harbor would have been far more convenient. The North River Marquis had long since issued an order. All pioneer knights reporting for duty for the first time must land from the north. He claimed this was to demonstrate resolve in taming the northern frontier, yet Leyen dismissed it as empty grandstanding. It was a gesture to win renown that forced everyone under him to expend unnecessary effort. The harbor bustled with activity, fitting for a provincial capital and thriving commercial hub. At a rough glance, hundreds of ships of all sizes waited for harbor officials from the governor's mansion to assign moorings. Leyen watched, assuming they would face a lengthy wait. No sooner had the thought crossed his mind than a harbor official signaled for their vessels to enter port ahead of the others. Leyen's two ships replied with flag signals. Hard starboard. The ships moved forward. Larger vessels blocking their path gave way voluntarily, yet several mercenaries and impetuous knights refused to shift. Why should we move for them? We arrived first, just because their ships are bigger? Nearby crews overheard the shout and watched with disdain, offering no warning. Many even laid wagers on how long these short-sighted mercenaries would survive on the northern frontier. At last, a younger knight could stand it no longer and called out loudly, "Hey, you fools, move your ships aside. Can you not see the crest on those sails? Those are vessels belonging to the Marquis of Red Crab." A Marquis? Aside from the two Prince Marquises related by blood to the Grand Duke, the Marquis of Red Crab was the most powerful and influential Marquis of all non-royal nobles. His reputation carried weight throughout the duchy. Now even the reckless mercenaries and adventurer groups realized their blunder and hastily made way. Several nobles who had waited hoping to witness trouble dropped their mocking expressions in disappointment. Born into privileged families, they recognized that these two ships represented far more than just the holdings of Red Crab Island. Why did the Red Crab sail behind the other vessel? Because the lead ship held greater prestige. It was the Purple Grape, a warship distinguished for service in the Realm War, named personally by the king. If that vessel had been blocked today, ill-intentioned parties could easily twist the incident and frame them for rebellion and disregard for royal authority. The ships docked smoothly, and the harbor official hurried over to complete the formalities. Only Leyen, Carl, and 12 other knights disembarked. The rest of the crew remained aboard. They would not linger long. Once they obtained the pioneer charter and purchased supplies, they would immediately depart for the territory. To simplify administrative work, the governor's mansion operated temporary offices near each harbor where pioneer charters could be issued directly. The main governor's mansion stood within North River City, in the center of the island. Lei sneered at the arrangement. The North River Marquis was an exceedingly cautious man. Red Crab Keep and Ironstone Keep were both built along island coastlines. From there, troops could swiftly board ships to respond to duchy conflicts. Proximity to harbors facilitated trade. This was standard practice for nobles across the duchy. The North River Marquis, however, had holed up inland on the island to defend against merfolk, building his provincial capital far from the shore. The layout created unnecessary obstacles for trade. It would never flourish. No great noble house had yet risen in the region, but if one day a powerful lord founded a city of comparable scale elsewhere, it would draw away more than half of North River City's trade. Upon landing, they first headed straight to the Violet Guild branch station nearby, exchanging their bank drafts for piles of gleaming gold coins. Only a guild backed by the Empire would dare bear the name Violet. It possessed the wealth and credibility to offer draft exchange services. It allowed nobles to trade cumbersome sacks of gold for thin slips of paper. Once the exchange was complete, the coins filled a large pouch. He pulled 20 gold coins from the bag and handed them to Carl. Take half them in to purchase supplies for the territory. Farming tools, linen cloth, salt, plus tableware, tents, and wine for our own use. Manage the purchases as you see fit, and spend all of this gold. He handed over an additional 13 gold coins. 1 coin for each night. Spend it as you wish. Buy something for yourselves or your families. Do not hold back. Once we reach the territory, opportunities to trade will be scarce for a long time. The remaining coins were carried back to the ships by the knights. Thank you, my lord. We praise your generosity. Receiving a gold coin upon arrival left the knights deeply grateful. A single gold coin equaled 100 silver pieces, a substantial sum. Their monthly wage at Red Crab Island amounted to merely a dozen silver coins. This 1 coin represented nearly a full year's pay. Very well, split up. I will collect the pioneer charter. Meet back at the harbor before midday. Leon departed. Knight Leo bit the coin lightly. Ah, so this is what gold tastes like. Though a knight, he had seen gold before, yet this coin, gifted by his lord, felt entirely different. Haha, perhaps some noble lady once kept this coin among her belongings. Who can tell? It might have been stowed away carefully by an elderly merchant for years, another knight joked. Having spent most of their lives in barracks, the knights spoke plainly, unlike Carl, who had grown up within a noble keep. I intend to keep this coin. When my son comes of age, I will show it to him. I plan to buy casks of wine. Each knight made their own plans for the coin. With Carl's permission, they separated to go shopping. Meanwhile, Lei stood outside the temporary governor's mansion office that handled frontier settlement matters, the Pioneer Administration Hall. Compared to the bustling harbor, this area was quiet. Only 3 to 5 pioneer knights entered and exited the building from time to time. After verifying his identity, a maid escorted him into the main hall on the ground floor. The hall was sparsely furnished with scattered tables and chairs. At its center rested a huge sand table map depicting the whole of North River Province. Several knights stood beside it, using thin wooden rods to mark the territories they hoped to claim. With them stood an elderly administrator clutching a ledger, recording each knight's chosen plot of land. Well now, look who it is. Sir Leon. What a surprise. I thought you might abandon your pioneer qualification. The administrator caught sight of Leon and let out an exclamation, wearing a bright smile even as his words carried an edge. Suggesting a knight would surrender their pioneer rights implied he was too cowardly to venture north. Leon saw no need for prolonged conversation with this man, nor any desire to maintain superficial politeness. I have come to collect my pioneer charter. Of course, that is your right. First you must select a pioneer territory, and only then can I issue your charter. Unfortunately, there are very few plots left to choose from. It cannot be helped, you arrived rather late. Heh. The administrator's gaze was mocking, his tone dismissive. He held little respect for Leon, a noble scion who had fallen from favor. Those who knew the situation expected Leon to be forced to pick a territory on the most dangerous frontier, where he would face constant fighting against merfolk. With poor luck, he would perish there. With better fortune, he would be trapped in endless conflict with merfolk, draining all resources to sustain his lands. When the 1-year term expired, his charter would be voided. He would lose his noble standing entirely, reduced to a wandering outcast with no hope of recovery. In the administrator's eyes, there was little reason to treat such a man with deference. There is no need for selection. I already possess a designated territory. Leon held out the Marquis of Red Crab's personal letter. Issue my pioneer charter at once. I am pressed for time. A territory already claimed? That is a poor jest, Sir Leon. Without formal approval from the governor's mansion, occupying land for frontier development violates the duchy's laws. The administrator invoked duchy law to pressure Lei in before casually picking up the letter. As he unfolded it, his casual expression froze, growing heavy. His fingertips brushed the plain signature at the bottom, while turmoil churned inside him. Ackerman Red Crab. That single name carried immense weight. Even if the North River Marquis himself stood here, he would need to think carefully before acting. If the letter had been signed by any other official of Red Crab Island, the administrator would not have reacted so gravely. That would merely signal a minor favor owed to Lei An. But this was the Marquis's own handwritten signature, and every character in the document matched the handwriting of the signature itself. It meant the busy Marquis had set aside precious time to write this letter word by word. Its significance could not be overstated. The Marquis of Red Crab held his grandson Lei An in high regard. Both he and the governor had been misled by claims from Ironstone Keep that the Marquis cared nothing for Lei An. The administrator read the letter through line by line, glanced back at the signature, and regretted his earlier attitude toward Lei An. After a long pause, he lifted his head to meet Lei An's steady gaze, his voice dry. "Sir Lei An, may I consult the governor first before? Is the letter a forgery?" Lei An cut him off. "No, certainly not." "Very well. Does it contradict duchy law?" Lei An's tone sharpened faintly. "Not in the slightest." "Then does the administrator, or the governor, follow a separate set of rules for my frontier settlement? Private laws of the governor's mansion?" Lei An pressed relentlessly. The administrator fell silent, unable to reply. He dared not claim the governor's mansion upheld laws that overrode the duchy's official statutes. Such words could be interpreted as treason. "Get my pioneer charter ready within 10 minutes. Otherwise, I will sail straight back to Red Crab Island and ask my grandfather to send a letter to the Grand Duke, reporting that the governor's mansion unjustly revoked my pioneer rights." As he spoke, a flicker of anger surfaced on Lei An's features, and the battle aura of an Earth Knight stirred within him. He had long known about the friction between the governor's mansion and Ironstone Keep. Whether he acted politely or harshly would not stop them from obstructing him later. He saw no reason to spare the administrator's feelings and spoke bluntly. Confronted by an enraged Earth Knight, the administrator bore immense pressure. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he weighed his options and nodded. "Very well." Receiving his consent, Lei An reined in his aura, softening his tone slightly. "I appreciate your assistance, administrator." In under 5 minutes, Lei An took possession of his pioneer charter and departed. The administrator immediately dispatched a messenger to the governor's mansion. He watched the knight ride away, deep worry etched across his face. His concern stemmed not from fear of punishment by the governor. He was the Marquis's trusted subordinate, chosen precisely to negotiate with Lei An. Given the circumstances, his response had been the most prudent choice. What troubled him was the future relationship between the governor's mansion and the Marquis of Red Crab. The Marquis of Red Crab had clearly thrown his support behind Lei An, while they had aligned with Ironstone Keep, who opposed the young knight. The prospect filled him with unease. When Lei An returned to the harbor, the knights had already come back. All required supplies had been purchased, and the exchanged gold coins safely stowed aboard the ship's cabins. "Young master, did you obtain the pioneer charter?" Carl knew the background and stepped forward to ask. The other knights also turned their eyes toward him. "I did." Lei An pulled out the charter, unfurling it for them all to see. This thin slip of paper granted them the chance to build a future in this vast northern frontier. Every knight, along with Lei An himself, felt eager anticipation. The ship set sail once more. North River Island lay at the southern edge of the province, while his initial territory stood in the province's west-central region. They needed to sail roughly 500 kilometers northwest, a voyage of just over 2 days, before reaching the Pioneer Lands. As the vessels departed North River Island, the 60-year-old North River Marquis had already received the messenger's report within the governor's mansion. In his study, after learning of all that had transpired at the harbor, the Marquis clutched the letter and stood facing the window for a very long time. At last, he spoke slowly. "Send word to Ironstone Keep and explain the situation." As for Lei An, he had never intended to provoke Lei An of his own accord. He bore no grievance against the young knight. If not for Ironstone Keep's requests, he would never have moved to hinder him. In his opinion, Ironspire Hold was far too sensitive. A down-and-out heir like Lei An could never pose a threat to Ironspire Hold's standing, even if he developed his lands for 100 years. There was simply no need to devote so much effort to targeting him. Still, relations had already soured after they had crossed both Lei An and Marquis Red Crab. Suppression would proceed, but cautiously. Constrained by the Marquis, their methods could not grow overly aggressive. Above all, Layan's life must be spared. Send word to the minor nobles near Layan's pioneering territory. Tell them to keep a close eye on Sir Layan. We've arrived, men. This shall be our starting point, the realm where we forge our future glory and renown. I name it Northwindhold. May we be as free, sharp, unyielding, and unstoppable as the bitter northern sea winds. Standing at the prow as the outline of an island emerged on the horizon, Layan pointed his knightly longsword forward. Pride and hope filled his voice as he presented their new domain and its name to his knights. Praise Northwind. Praise glory. The knights, burning with passion, drew their swords and shouted aloud. Yet as the ships drew nearer, Layan's elation faded, replaced by heaviness and doubt. Young master, why is this island so bare? Carl's question cut straight to the heart. The island stretching before them held barely a trace of greenery. Layan shared that very confusion. At roughly 150 square kilometers, the land could easily sustain 3,000 settlers. There was no reason for them to have cleared every last tree. Nor could the island have always looked like this. It was once an exclave of Red Crab Isle. If the original Red Crab expedition had possessed any sense, they would never have chosen to settle such a barren, treeless isle. People. After sailing around the shore, they found only 2 gently sloped beaches, to the north and south, suitable for docking. The southern beach was small and appeared deserted, so the ships circled north to make landfall. As they approached, they spotted a ragged procession winding along the shore from the western coast toward the south. A man clad in far finer garments marched ahead, overseeing the line with arrogant swagger. Move faster, you lot. If you anger the merfolk, even the Baron cannot save you. Gus strode at the front of the column, shouting to urge the settlers onward. He held his nose high, sneering at the numb, ragged folk trailing behind, making no attempt to hide his contempt. If not for the Baron's orders, he would never remain in this backwater, supervising these commoners as they burned charcoal. Worse still, he had to lead them south to deliver tribute to the merfolk. The merfolk were equally detestable. If the Baron's soldiers could defeat them outright, there would be no need for this regular tribute pact. Beast. 20-year-old Russo burned with rage and muttered the curse under his breath, only for an elder beside him to tug sharply at his arm and silence him. From the tales of his elders, he knew they were originally settlers from Red Crab Isle. Their rightful lords belonged to Red Crab, not this steward sent by the cursed Baron of Black Iron Isle. A ship. A large ship. Someone in the crowd caught sight of the vessels sailing across the waves. Red Crab. It's Red Crab's banner. An elderly settler, one of the first to migrate here, instantly recognized the sigil stitched to the ship's sails. A murmur rippled through the line. The settlers halted of their own accord, silently resisting Gus's authority. At the sight of the 2 large warships, a rare sight so far inland, Gus lost all his arrogance. Fear washed over his face. Abandoning the settlers, he scrambled to flee toward the nearby woodland. By now the ships had reached the shore, though the gangplanks were not yet lowered. Carl, seize him. The cold command rang out. In the next instant, the settlers watched a lithe, silver-cloaked figure leap from the vessel and race across the sand toward them. Before most could process what was happening, 2 dull thuds echoed. Gus, the portly steward who had lorded over them and brought endless suffering, was lifted like a lifeless hound, dragged out of the trees and tossed onto the sand as if he were refuse. Who are you? What gives you leave to set foot on this exclave of Red Crab Isle, my land? Layan and his knights marched forward, surrounding Gus. Layan's tone was icy as he pressed his interrogation. The fat man bore the strength of a low-ranking sworn knight. Layan needed no guesswork to know he had been sent by a neighboring noble who had seized the chance to claim this neglected territory. Trembling with terror, Gus's eyes darted as he tried to concoct an excuse. "And my lord, spare me. I am the one who governs this isle." Arg. The words died in his throat as searing pain erupted along the side of his face. He reached up, his palm slick with warm blood. His ear was gone. He stared in horror. The young knight standing before him had drawn his blade and severed the appendage. The bloodied ear was pinched between gloved fingers, then tossed onto the sand with open disgust. "I detest lies. Choose your next words carefully. My lord, I speak the truth, I truly." "Still you persist in falsehood." Layan's anger flared. Battle aura surged from his frame, the crushing presence of an Earth Knight bearing down upon Gus. His sword slid free, the blade pressed against the man's thick neck. Faced with the specter of death and fully aware of the young knight's formidable power, the last shred of hope in Gus's heart crumbled. He had no doubt he would be slain if he withheld the truth, and the Baron could do nothing to save him. "I will speak." Fear lent a tremulous, almost weeping tone to his voice. The interrogation proceeded smoothly after that. Layan's suspicions proved correct. Gus hailed from Black Iron Isle, roughly 50 li north of Northwind Isle. Its lord was a pioneer who had arrived on the frontier 2 years prior. Early this year, he had earned a baronial title for slaying merfolk. Where were you leading these people? Gus hesitated and stumbled over his reply. Before he could speak, a young man in the crowd shouted out, "My lord, he is a monster. He means to send us to our deaths." All eyes turned toward a gaunt boy of 14 or 15. He wore nothing more than a tattered scrap of cloth covering his waist, and linear scars, left by whipping, crisscrossed his exposed skin. "What is your name?" Layan's tone softened at once. "My lord, I am Russo." Frightened, the boy knelt and answered quietly, "Russo, you are brave. Come, stand before me." Layan treated his own settlers and his enemies as two separate worlds. The knights knew his temperament well and thought nothing of the shift. The watching settlers, however, were astonished. Only moments earlier, this lord had cut off Gus's ear, his expression more fearsome than any merfolk. Now he smiled and praised the boy. Emboldened, Russo's fear faded. He rose and stepped to Layan's side. "Tell me, where were you being taken?" "We were going to deliver tribute to the merfolk in the south." Russo gestured toward two stout elders in the line and the bound livestock. "The merfolk demand 2 of us each month. We must also burn charcoal for Black Iron Isle. Gus is the steward. He seized young women from our village." Still a child, Russo recounted events haltingly, speaking in disjointed bursts as memories surfaced. Yet combining his testimony with what he had learned from Gus, alongside what he could see with his own eyes, Layan pieced together the full story of the island. As he had suspected, the Baron of Black Iron had arrived at the frontier 3 years ago, a destitute knight with only a handful of brothers at his side. Penniless and landless, he struggled to establish a foothold. Seeking another path to advancement, he set his sights on military merit and hunted merfolk relentlessly. Under the duchy's laws, anyone who brought merfolk heads to the governor's hall could claim merit rewards. While pursuing a small band of merfolk, he chanced upon Northwind Isle. He discovered a merfolk tribe on the southern shore, along with thousands of settlers abandoned here by Red Crab Isle. He could have wiped out the merfolk then and there, yet the Baron saw an opportunity for steady profit. He spared them, intending to keep the tribe alive as an endless source of battle merit. He seized control of the island's settlers, ordering them to deliver regular livestock to sustain the merfolk. Cruel as the scheme was, it was clever, until it spiraled out of control. The merfolk tribe grew far larger than he had anticipated. Somehow they drew more of their kin to the isle, and overnight their strength matched the Baron's forces. Eradicating them was no longer feasible. The Baron wished to keep the tribe intact to maintain his flow of merit and refused to abandon this source of gain. The merfolk, meanwhile, feared the Baron might report their existence to the governor and bring destruction down upon them. Thus, a pact, a transaction, was struck between the two parties, each acting out of hidden motives. The Baron required the merfolk to hand over the bodies of tribe members who died naturally, alongside periodic tribute of undersea treasures, and promised the merfolk would not hunt the island settlers without cause. In return, the Baron would not alert the governor. Each month, he was bound to supply a set amount of livestock plus 2 settlers who were fattened for the merfolk. The settlers' remains would also be handed over afterward. This cruel treaty condemned the island's folk to endless suffering. They raised livestock for the monthly merfolk tribute. As for the 2 human sacrifices demanded by the merfolk, the settlers agreed to draw lots starting with the eldest among them, who would march to their deaths. The elderly chosen were confined to huts, forbidden almost all labor. They were fed large portions of food taken from other villagers to fatten them before being offered to the merfolk. The 2 rotund elders Russo had pointed out were that month's tribute. Life was already a nightmare for the settlers, yet the Baron pressed them further. He had uncovered a small iron mine on his own isle, and smelting iron required vast quantities of charcoal. For this reason, he demanded the settlers of Northwind Isle produce charcoal for him. That was why he had not driven the settlers away. He wanted their labor, and was willing to shield them from the merfolk for that purpose. The relentless charcoal production stripped more than 70% of the island's trees. The Gus he had captured was the Baron's agent, tasked with overseeing all these operations. A low-ranking sworn knight, he easily kept 3,000 commoners under his heel. The man acted with complete impunity. Beatings and verbal abuse were daily occurrences, and violence and murder were commonplace. He frequently seized young women from the village to serve him. As each fresh atrocity came to light, Gus shook uncontrollably. He abandoned hope of surviving and only prayed the Earth Knight would grant him a swift end. After hearing all the accusations, even Layan, who prided himself on his composure, burned with anger. He was especially enraged to learn that nearly 5,000 settlers had lived on the island 3 years prior. In just 3 years, almost 2,000 had perished, leaving only 3,000 remaining. Rearing merfolk and tormenting his settlers was monstrous behavior. These were his people. 2,000 settlers represented an invaluable resource for a fledgling territory, laborers who could drive its growth. That great potential had been squandered by the wretched Baron of Black Iron Isle. He longed to sail for Black Iron Isle and strike the man down himself. Very well. You may return for now, Russo. Layan patted the boy's rough, matted hair. Carl, make a note. See that the boy receives half a sack of rye grain as a reward. As you command, young master. You are always generous and merciful. Having uncovered the truth, Layan produced the Marquis's charter and pioneering grant, displaying them before the nervous settlers still struggling to grasp what was happening. Let me introduce myself. I am Layan, grandson of Marquis Redcrab. From this day onward, I take governance of this island. You are now my people, and my knights will safeguard you. He offered no lengthy speech, simply proclaiming his sovereignty. The settlers accepted the news readily. To them, no new lord could possibly be worse than the torment they had endured, and from what they had witnessed, this new ruler seemed benevolent. Long live our lord. Led by the village elders, the crowd knelt as one, swearing fealty. Rise. Layan acknowledged their kneeling calmly and issued his first order. Return to your homes by the path you came. I will move swiftly to destroy the merfolk, and I will seek justice against Black Iron Isle. From this moment, all tribute ceases. Charcoal production ends. Long live our merciful lord. The command was met with universal relief. Their spirits transformed completely. They gathered their belongings and set off for the village with lightened steps. The village lay not far away, and the procession arrived soon after. To make control easier, the Baron had gathered all the island's settlers into one large settlement. Yet generations of harsh exploitation left the village visibly impoverished. Dwellings were crude huts built from mud, branches, and stone. Beyond the village stretched barren farmland, where sickly, yellow crops struggled to grow. Word had raced ahead, and villagers who had remained behind waited at the entrance to greet them. My gracious lord, I offer you my respects. I am Neil. The man at the front was middle-aged, gaunt, and dark-skinned, making him appear older than he was, yet his spirit remained firm. I was appointed administrative officer by Red Crab Isle to remain here. 10 knights were originally stationed with me, yet they were all. No more words were needed. Red Crab Isle cared little for this distant exclave. The knights left behind would have been low-ranking, and killing them would have been a simple matter. Layan marveled at the Baron's recklessness. He either did not know this land belonged to Red Crab Isle, or possessed unimaginable audacity to encroach on the Marquis's territory. Layan studied Neil. He commanded clear respect among the villagers, and his appointment by Red Crab marked him as a capable man worth employing, at least for the time being. Good afternoon, Administrative Officer Neil. The greeting signified Layan recognized his position. Good afternoon, my lord. How may I serve you? Neil knelt and bowed his head deeply, overcome with emotion. Have the livestock distributed among the villagers. Ensure the 2 elders are properly cared for. Carl, once Neil has settled these matters, take men to unload the ship's cargo and transport it to Gus's compound. It shall be done. Carl and Neil acknowledged the order and departed to carry out the tasks. Before leaving, Carl handed Gus over to another knight. Gus's compound stood at the village's center, a manor spanning more than a dozen mu of land, the only decent residence for miles. Once cleared, it would serve perfectly as Layan's lordly manor. Lead the way, Russo. Layan held the boy in high regard. He still possessed a conscience, along with the courage and drive of youth. At once, my lord, there was barely any need for guidance. The manor stood out plainly among the huts. They reached the manor gates, and the grounds unfolded before them. A low stone palisade encircled the property, enclosing more than a dozen stone buildings of unknown purpose. Who are you? You have no right to trespass here. This is Master Gus's land. Do you seek death? As they stepped inside, a group of women in far better clothing hurried forward, confronting them sharply. My lord, they are villagers who were brought into the compound by force, Russo explained promptly. Once ordinary folk, they had lived within the manor for so long that they had grown twisted. They saw themselves as superior to the common villagers outside, acting as if they were the master's household ladies, and had often aided Gus in tormenting the settlement. Displeasure flickered across Layan's face. These women failed utterly to see how the tide had turned. They've been bound and locked up alongside Gus. They will stand trial together at dawn tomorrow. He had no time to waste bickering with this group of women. Convinced they were troublemakers, he would let justice be handed down to all of them in due course. The knights moved swiftly, subduing the 8 women in mere moments. They stuffed rags into the captives' mouths and bound them tightly with rope. "My lord, we can lock them in the cellar. This way, follow me." Rousseau led the way toward a cellar tucked away on the edge of the manor. Though called a cellar, it functioned more like an underground prison, sealed off by a heavy wooden door. As they drew near, Leon caught a putrid stench, a mix of waste and damp soil. Faint, desperate rustling and moans drifted out from within. Clearly, more prisoners were being held down there. "Open it." One knight stepped forward, pinching his nose in one hand while gripping the door's iron chain with the other. A firm heave snapped the chain cleanly. When the door swung wide, the foul odor washed over them in full force. Leon lost all desire to step inside and gestured to Rousseau. "Bring everyone out." Rousseau showed no sign of revulsion and strode straight into the darkness. Shortly afterward, 15 haggard figures stumbled out, looking far worse off than the villagers above. 10 men and 5 women, all relatively young. The men wore no clothing, completely bare, while the 5 women were draped in ill-fitting men's garments scavenged from somewhere. "My lord," far more prudent than Gus's followers, they dropped to their knees the instant they emerged, voicing their gratitude to Leon. "Rise." Once given leave, the 15 lined up of their own accord, waiting for his judgment. "Start with you. Speak one at a time, and tell me why you were imprisoned. Speak the truth. I have no patience for liars." Leon pointed to the man at the far left of the line. "My lord, I was locked away for speaking out against that brute Gus." Leon narrowed his eyes and listened closely. At the rank of Earth Knight, few subtle details escaped his senses. The man's breathing remained steady, his heartbeat calm, his expression open and his gaze unwavering. He spoke honestly. "Next, my lord, I tried to run. I knocked over the charcoal kiln." All 15 told their tales truthfully. Most of the men were among the village's more resolute folk, imprisoned for resisting Gus in one way or another. The women's stories were simpler. Gus had set his sights on them, and their refusal to submit had enraged the fat tyrant. "Leo, record these 10 men's names. They will serve under you from now on. Train them as militiamen, and pay each one silver coin monthly." These men possessed backbone, making them ideal recruits for the militia. He did not expect them to fight on battlefields, but they would serve well maintaining order within the village. As for the women, those who wish to return home may leave. Those who choose to stay can work menial chores within the manor, earning 30 copper coins each month. These women had been seized by Gus. Returning to their villages would likely bring scorn and hardship, so employment within the manor was the kinder option. He issued the arrangements without first asking for their consent. He was confident they would accept. In an era where dock porters earned merely 1 copper coin per day, the wages he offered were generous. "Thank you, my lord. We shall work diligently." Leon had grown accustomed to such profuse thanks. He acknowledged their gratitude calmly and waved them away. All 5 women chose to remain, an outcome Leon had already anticipated. The dungeon was cleared, and Gus and his followers were locked inside. They received no food and remained bound. A single night without sustenance would not kill them, though they would not live long enough to starve. They would face execution at first light. Gus had treated his subjects with merciless cruelty, yet spared no luxury for himself. The manor boasted every comfort: a wine cellar, storage warehouses, a kitchen, stables, and more. Clear out all these quarters. Leave the large furnishings where they stand, but remove everything else, and take stock of all supplies. He planned to keep the heavy furniture, but replace all smaller belongings with new stock. Carl had purchased a full set of daily goods at North River Wharf, enough to see them settled. The knights volunteered to handle the work. Possessing strength far beyond ordinary men, they finished the task quickly. Within an hour, the entire manor had been cleaned from top to bottom. Meanwhile, Carl's men hauled all supplies ashore from the ships. Household goods were carried directly into the manor, while gold, grain, and other provisions were tallied and secured in storage. The 14 fine warhorses they had brought were led to the stables. These chargers were a gift from the Marquis. Each of the 14 knights received one. All carried the blood of magical beasts, rare and valuable steeds. Alongside the horses, the Marquis had also gifted each knight a full suit of armor and a long sword, which he had distributed immediately upon arrival, the very arms they wore now. By the time the inventory was complete, afternoon had arrived. The largest building on the grounds, a 2-story villa, became Leon's lord's manor. Neil, the steward, arrived shortly afterward, clutching a stack of parchment scrolls and requesting an audience. "Good afternoon, my lord." Neil greeted him upon entering, then spread the scrolls across the table and unrolled one for Layan to examine. "This is the supply manifest. Please review it and see if anything is missing." The neatly pinned document listed every resource. Rye, 200 long tons, gold coins, 967, silver coins, 160, copper coins, 10063, war horses, 14, dray horses, 16, oxen for plowing, 8, farmland, 1,000 acres, charcoal, 20 long tons. Several small livestock and farming tools remain in the villagers' hands and cannot be counted. "Shall I issue an order to collect them?" Russo's tone held quiet concern as he spoke of the villagers' property, clearly fearing Layan would seize their belongings. Layan saw through his worry at once. It seemed his steward held genuine affection for the common folk, a virtue, yet one that might cloud his judgment when governing. He could only hope Neil would not let sentiment compromise his duties. "There is no need. Let them keep what they have. They are the ones who will till the land. Farming tools serve me no purpose locked in storage." "Wise judgment, my lord." Neil breathed a quiet sigh of relief. He had no wish to strip these destitute villagers of what little they owned. "Where is the charcoal stored?" Layan's gaze lingered on that line of the manifest. Charcoal was an invaluable commodity, worth roughly 10 times the price of grain, essential for metalworking and heating. Within the North Sea Principality, an island realm scarce in timber, bulk charcoal could fetch up to 15 times grain's value. One long ton sold for 10,000 copper coins, equal to 1 gold coin. 20 tons represented 20 gold coins, a substantial sum. Several large kilns stand within the village. All charcoal produced there is stacked beside each kiln. Layan traced the manifest with his finger for a moment before asking another question. "How many subjects live on this island now? And how many households are there?" Neil had the answer ready. He pulled another parchment from the pile and reported, 3,076 residents, plus the 109 people you brought with you. Our population now stands at 3,185, across 950 households. I see little farmland across the island. How did they sustain themselves before my arrival? Do the villagers hold any reserve grain now?" The Baron Blackiron forced all able-bodied islanders to work the charcoal kilns, creating a constant grain shortage. He sent shipments of grain each month to distribute among the people. This system of monthly allotments meant the villagers possessed no surplus food of their own. "Here is what we shall do. Release 20 tons of grain from storage. The Lord's Manor will exchange grain for charcoal at a 1-to-1 weight ratio. All charcoal is to be collected and placed in storage, and the grain distributed evenly among every resident. I grant you 3 days to complete this task." Layan issued the ruling outright. Trading grain for charcoal avoided mass starvation without fostering a culture of handouts. 20 tons of grain, divided among the population, gave each person more than 12 pounds. Enough to sustain them for some time. After all, the charcoal had been earned through their labor. "Gather all plow oxen and dray horses. Select a compound and assign experienced villagers to tend them. Hire 5 workers on a monthly wage of 50 copper coins. Feed will be supplied from the manor stores. Recruit another 5 staff for the manor to care exclusively for the 14 war horses. They shall also receive 50 copper coins monthly, with lodging and meals provided within the Lord's Manor." Neil scribbled every instruction diligently in his notebook. "Send word to all subjects to assemble tomorrow. I intend to meet them publicly, alongside the execution of Gus. We shall not grant that monster Gus a simple hanging. I leave his judgment to the island's people themselves." Layan laid out task after task. The territory stood newly claimed, countless affairs awaiting attention. Still, progress must come step by step. The orders he had given would keep Neil and the villagers occupied for days to come. "I have recorded everything. Praise be to you, merciful Lord. Your arrival is a blessing for Northwind Isle." Layan smiled, but said nothing in reply. "A governing chamber is needed for official business. The room next door shall be yours to administer affairs. That boy Russo is sharp. Let him learn governance under your tutelage, and teach him to read and write." Neil nodded and jotted the note down. "That covers matters for now, steward. You may depart. Arrange housing for the knights' families, and deliver provisions to them." Neil bowed and began to retreat, but before he crossed the threshold, Layan's voice halted him once more. "One last thing, when distributing grain, give Russo an extra half sack, as I promised him earlier." "It shall be done, my lord." Stepping outside the manor, Neil let out a long breath. He stared at his densely filled notebook, his eyes bright with hope. Every decree written there struck him as deeply benevolent. Truly, they had gained a just lord. He glanced toward the distant horizon, tucked the scrolls safely within his cloak, and strode off toward the village. Dinner marked their first meal on the new territory. Lay-in invited the knights, their attendants, and steward Neil, more than 30 people in total, to a modest feast. The food included chickens, ducks, fish purchased from villagers with copper coin, and freshly baked white bread. We have halted tribute payments to the merfolk clans. They will almost certainly send scouts under cover of night to investigate. The knights must patrol, so there will be no wine tonight. We drink water in its stead. Before the feast began, Lay-in lifted his wooden cup and spoke. Come, a toast to all of you, and to Northwind. The knights rose at once, raising their own cups high. To our lord. To Northwind. They drained their water cups. Every soul present now knew their home lay upon this remote island. The feast ended early. The knights departed to begin patrols, leaving Lay-in with a quiet evening. He glanced at the lovely sprite insects housed within the jade casket before retiring for the night. It was not laziness. Dusk had fallen, and though his eyes could pierce the dimness, the poor light strained him. Unlike Ironstone Fort or Red Crab Keep, where enduring magical lamps lit every hall through the night, this island relied on crude oil lamps fueled by oily sea fish. Their faint, flickering light came paired with a sharp, fishy stench. Lane could not bear the thought of sleeping in such an unpleasant room. Dawn broke pale the next morning, and Carl and Neil arrived for an audience early. Young master, as you predicted. 1 merfolk sergeant and 15 common merfolk warriors slipped ashore last night to spy on us. The knights captured them alive. Excellent. Bring them to the public square. They will face execution alongside the others. Once Carl finished his report, Neil took over. My lord, housing for the knights' families is fully arranged. We have settled them in homes close to the manor. Work on the livestock is underway. Plow oxen and dray horses are quartered in an empty yard, and we have hired experienced tenders. They can begin work once the public judgment concludes. As for the grain distribution you ordered, the volume is substantial, so we expect to finish deliveries by nightfall. Lay-in noticed the steward's sunken eyes and weary bearing. He had clearly worked through the night. You have done admirable work, Master Neil, yet you need not exhaust yourself completely. I understand, my lord, rest assured. Neil agreed readily, yet he had no intention of slowing his pace. Now that the territory possessed a compassionate lord and promising new laws, he burned to implement every order, so the suffering villagers might see better days soon. When he first came to the island, he had looked down on these common folk, but many hardships followed afterward. After losing his post as steward, ignorant of charcoal burning or farming, he nearly starved. It was these villagers he once scorned who saved him. Having endured those nightmarish days beside them, his perspective had shifted. He felt sincere gratitude and sympathy for the people who aided him, and he longed to serve them. Have all subjects gathered? Yes, my lord. They arrived long before sunrise. Not a single soul is absent. The prospect of passing judgment on Gus, the man who brought endless torment to their island, had kept many awake all night. They rushed to the open ground at first light. Very well. Carl, bring the prisoners up from the cellar. It is time to meet our people. The so-called public square was merely a wide clearing not far from the manor, the location Neil had announced to all villagers in advance. 3,000 people stood packed upon the open ground, yet silence reigned. Every gaze fixed firmly on the manor gates in the distance. Whispers rippled through the crowd only when Lay-in and his knights appeared. Their faces held admiration, hope, and quiet acceptance. No raised platform had been built. Lay-in chose a spot near the clearing's center, and the villagers parted voluntarily to let the knights pass. He halted and stood firm. Lay-in cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. People of the island, I am Lay-in, entrusted by the Marquis of Red Crab and acting under the Principality's Charter of Colonization. I formally claimed this island yesterday. Yesterday we arrested Gus and his accomplices, whose crimes are unspeakable. I have summoned you today for 2 purposes. First, to introduce myself, and second, to pass judgment on Gus's tyrannical band, along with the 16 merfolk captured while raiding our village last night. Hear him, praise our lord. Execute the monster Gus. Cheers erupted as Lay-in finished his brief address. Neil had already spread word of Gus's upcoming trial the previous evening. Still, many villagers harbored faint doubts. Hearing the announcement from Lay-in, the island's new ruler, confirmed it beyond all question. Hatred for Gus swelled, transforming into respect and loyalty toward their new lord. Lay-in stepped back after his opening speech, leaving the formal proceedings to Steward Neil. At Lay-in's signal, Neil stepped forward and held up both hands. Silence. Once quiet returned, Neil pulled out his notebook and proclaimed in a clear, booming voice, "Before we pass judgment on Gus and his followers, I shall announce 3 official edicts on behalf of the Lord's governing chamber. First, from this day onward, all tribute to the merfolk clans is terminated. All goods collected as tribute last month shall be returned to the villagers. Second, the production of charcoal ceases immediately, and unauthorized tree felling is forbidden. All charcoal already produced will be purchased by the Lord's manor at a rate of 1 pound of grain per pound of charcoal. The exchanged grain will be distributed evenly within 3 days. Third, this island shall officially bear the name Northwind Isle. These 3 edicts shall be strictly enforced. Violators face flogging. Repeat offenders will be exiled from the island." The edicts restated the policies Lei had already settled on, spoken publicly to cement their authority, and ensure every villager heard them clearly. Lei watched the crowd's reactions closely. To his surprise, not a single person showed resistance, even regarding the grain distribution terms. Under Gus's brutal tyranny, the villagers had forged strong unity, a rare sight across other realms. That boded well for Lei. He feared no uprising from his people. What he dreaded were petty feuds and conflict over shared resources. Such squabbling would prove far more troublesome to resolve. Once the edicts were read, Neil unfurled another parchment, the document everyone waited for most eagerly. "Now, I shall read the verdict against Gus's faction and the invading merfolk. Now, the verdict against Gus and his followers, as well as the invading Murlocs, shall be read aloud. The Murlocs raided the territory and caused civilian casualties. They are sentenced to death by beheading, to be carried out immediately." As the judgment fell, knights who had long stood ready drew their swords and circled around the bound Murlocs. Their bodies crisscrossed with whip wounds. Murlocs were chaotic, evil creatures with fish heads and human torsos, hideous in appearance and flesh-eating beasts through and through. They ought not to be confused with merfolk. Merfolk were lawful, kind beings with human upper bodies and fish tails, famed for their beauty. Their tears turned to pearls, making them worthy of friendship and trade. These 16 Murlocs had been captured in the early hours of the previous night. Throughout the rest of the night, the knights had interrogated them, extracting every scrap of information they possessed. They showed no mercy toward these brutal, loathsome beings. Stepping behind each captive, they drove a boot into the backs of the Murlocs' knees, forcing them to kneel. There were 16 Murlocs in total. 5 knights would serve as executioners. While at Carl's order, the remaining 10 executions were entrusted to 10 militiamen. It was time for them to witness such justice and harden their resolve. Execute them. At the command, swords sliced through the air. A flash of cold steel, and the ugly heads of the Murlocs tore free from their necks. Carried more than a meter forward by momentum, stinking blood gushed forth. As headless bodies crumpled to the ground, the liquid soaked into the parched earth. Fueled by long-standing hatred for the Murlocs, the militiamen showed no hesitation. Eyes blazing, they struck clean, decisive blows. The women who followed Gus were seized against their will by him and are victims in their own right. Yet they fell under his influence, lost their way, and aided him in harming the territory's folk. They received the death sentence. Considering their offenses are not the gravest, they shall be hanged, and their bodies cast into the sea to return to the embrace of the sea god. Execute them. No formal gallows stood ready. A simple tree was chosen, nooses slung over its branches. The women, pale with terror, were hoisted upward. There were no screams, no prolonged struggles. Their passing was quiet, unremarkable, and tragic, much like their lives. Unlike the roar of cheers that greeted the Murlocs' end, the townsfolk watched these women with quiet pity. Yet not a single soul voiced genuine sorrow for them. Gus, Knight of Black Iron Isle, seized Northwind Isle by force and slaughtered commoners. The sentence is death. Neil paused briefly here, gesturing toward Rain. Our Lord is merciful. He grants the power of execution to all folk gathered here today. Bring him forth. Gus was pushed into the throng of enraged commoners. Hatred ignited in the crowd. They shouted, wept, roared, and surged forward, wielding shovels, sickles, hoes, clubs, stones, and broken branches to vent years of pent-up anger upon him. Chaos reigned, every emotion laid bare. This reckoning with Gus lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, nothing remained of the man. The steward who had once lorded over them, untouchable and arrogant, had been obliterated. The unjust rule he embodied vanished alongside him. His remains sank into the soil, nourishing dormant seeds that would soon sprout. New order would rise alongside them, a new reign, belonging to North Wind, belonging to Rain. The trial concluded, Yet the villagers did not disperse. Every gaze fixed firmly on Rain. "Everyone, you may go now." At Rain's words, the crowd stirred. One after another, they knelt and bowed their heads deeply, offering silent homage. Then they rose, departing with frequent glances back. Through this public judgment, Rain's authority over the territory was firmly established. That had been his purpose in staging such an open proceeding. In the hearts of his people, he stood as their savior, smoothing the path for all the policies he planned to enact. Once the villagers left, only the bodies remained. As decreed, the women's remains were carried to the shore and cast into the ocean. The Murloc corpses required different handling. The duchy, and the vast kingdoms and empires built along these seas, had carved every stretch of their territory from the hands of sea-dwelling races. For that reason, most sea folk and human settlers stood as bitter enemies. The lands of North Sea Duchy had been wrested directly from Murloc control. This newly settled North Sea province had been claimed by the Grand Duke and his warriors after years of brutal combat, fighting for every stretch of shoreline at terrible cost. Countless nobles and knights had perished in the campaigns. Hatred toward Murlocs ran deep within the duchy, shared even by the Grand Duke himself. An official edict rewarded merit to knights who eliminated stray Murlocs during frontier expansion. Merit varied based on the strength of the Murloc slain. Ordinary Murloc foot soldiers earn merit at a ratio of 1 merit point for every 1,000 kills. A single merit point might seem meager, yet it carried immense weight. An aspiring frontier knight could earn a hereditary barony, provided his territory prospered, upon gaining just 1 merit point. The reward drove relentless hunting. Within the province, Murlocs had been nearly wiped out, traded for merit that elevated a new generation of nobles. Most of these newly ennobled men hailed from established families, with clan resources backing them. Gathering enough merit proved far simpler. Frontier expansion appeared to offer opportunity to anyone willing to risk everything, an open ladder for advancement. Yet class divides endured beneath the surface. 9 out of every man who built a prosperous domain came from established lineages. Few landless nobles and wandering knights ever rose to power. Above ordinary Murloc soldiers stood sergeants, matching the strength of apprentice knights, worth 1 merit point per 100 slain. Next came centurions, equal to full knights, earning 1 merit point for every 10 killed. Kiliarchs ranked higher still, possessing the power of earth knights. Slaying one granted a full merit point, enough to claim a hereditary barony within the duchy. At the pinnacle of Murloc society stood Murloc generals, warriors of Sky Knight caliber. Creatures of such power sat atop the world's combat hierarchy. Conflicts surrounding their deaths extended far beyond simple merit rewards. No tally of merit could measure such an achievement. The 16 Murloc scouts captured this time included 1 sergeant and 15 foot soldiers, amounting to 0.025 merit points. Rain would not dismiss even small gains. He ordered the knights to sever and dry the Murlocs' heads to serve as proof for merit claims in days to come. The bodies were strung up outside the village as a warning to any who would threaten the isle. With the trial complete, peace returned temporarily to the folk of the territory. Now Rain could set about sweeping reforms across Northwind Isle. Standing on the 2nd floor of the manor villa, Rain gazed out toward the Purple Grape, anchored along the coast. The fine ship looked wildly out of place beside Northwind Isle's crude shorelines, and his expression grew thoughtful. Vessels were vital to the territory's future, essential for trade and for the looming conflict with Black Iron Isle. Yet according to Neil's population census, not a single experienced sailor resided on the isle. That posed a serious obstacle. Rain needed to deal with Baron Black Iron swiftly. If the Baron learned what had transpired and brought grievances before the governor, Rain's chance to overthrow him would vanish. Duchy law discouraged open warfare between nobles, though the rule carried little weight on these remote new frontiers. Lands were sparse, dangers abundant, and nobles who vanished quietly often went unnoticed by distant authorities. The critical rule was to avoid stirring widespread public outcry. Rain feared delay. Should Baron Black Iron discover the events on Northwind Isle and bring formal charges to the governor's mansion? The governor, who held no fondness for Rain, would watch his every move closely. Bringing the Baron down afterward would become all but impossible. Rain could not abide such an outcome. Enmity already existed between them. He could not rest knowing the Baron still drew breath. Moreover, just as Baron Black Iron coveted Northwind Isle's timber, Rain coveted the small iron mine on Black Iron Isle. Iron was a scarce, costly commodity across these island realms, indispensable for equipping soldiers. He would seize that mine, no matter what. Luna, fetch the steward. Tell him to bring the Harrier hawk captured from Gus. Rain did not turn as he spoke to the maid tidying the chamber, one of the women rescued from the cellar, who had reported to the manor at noon that day. At once, my lord. The maid bowed and withdrew. Moments later, a soft knock echoed at the door. Enter. Neil stepped inside once granted leave, carrying a cage holding the hawk in one hand and his bound notes tucked under the opposite arm. You sent for me, my lord. Rain gestured for him to set the cage upon the table. Harrier hawks were low-rank magical beasts. They flew swiftly and possessed an innate sense of direction, able to navigate back to their roosts just as carrier pigeons did. Nobles across the duchy employed them as messengers. Rain possessed a dozen such birds brought from Red Crab Isle to maintain contact with his grandfather, entrusted to the knights for care. This particular hawk had been seized from Gus, used to carry letters between the steward and Baron Blackiron. Rain studied the small bird briefly, then pulled out a chair and sat. He spread a blank parchment sheet to his right and unfolded one of the old captured letters exchanged between Gus and the Baron to his left. Taking a quill and dipping it in ink, he bent over the parchment and began writing, glancing repeatedly at the reference letter beside him. He intended to mimic Gus's handwriting. At the power of an Earth Knight, observation and bodily control were refined enough for such a task. He felt confident no one would detect the forgery. The letter's content was straightforward. Written in Gus's voice, it informed the Baron that a batch of charcoal had been produced and awaited collection, requesting the Baron send ships to transport the cargo. The Baron's vessels regularly sailed between Black Iron and North Wind Isle, and their crews held generations of seafaring knowledge. Rain planned to see ship and sailors alike once they arrived. With experienced hands, the Purple Grape could sail at last. Once he had a crew, he would launch an assault on Black Iron Isle and take the head of the greedy noble who dared reach into Rain's lands and wealth. Is all well across the territory? Rain asked as he wrote, dividing his focus between the task and governance. All remains steady. I have arranged folk to tend the farmlands, though. Neil hesitated, his tone heavy with sorrow. Though what? The two elderly folk once held as offerings for the Murlocs have passed away. Rain's quill halted. He lifted his head. Dead. He remembered the elders well. Russo had pointed them out to him, captives being fattened to be sacrificed to the Murlocs. Their deaths were hardly unexpected. Advanced in years, subjected to forced overfeeding, their bodies had long since failed. It is true, Neil replied sadly. The two elders had endured great hardship. They had lived long enough to witness Gus receive justice, a small comfort before their end. What custom governed burials here before the Murlocs demanded sacrifices? Rain asked. He already knew that in recent years, captives had been fed to the sea raiders. All land on the isle belongs to the Lord. Traditionally, the deceased are committed to the waves. As you know, usable land is precious here. It was common practice across all island realms. Common folk held no right to mark graves. Their bodies were consigned to the ocean. Follow that tradition, then. Rain adapted to local custom, even though his past life had taught him to honor the dead with burial in earth. Very well, my lord. I shall oversee it this afternoon. Neil paused, holding back further words before accepting the command. Just then, Rain finished the letter. He inspected the text, allowed the ink to dry, and handed the parchment over. Read it. You know Gus far better than I. Tell me if anything rings false. Neil accepted the letter respectfully and read each line carefully. As he read, his eyes lit up. He now understood his lord's stratagem. As steward, he knew the territory's desperate shortage of skilled sailors. Incredible. This plan is masterful. Your handwriting matches Gus's perfectly. It is astonishing. Neil voiced his admiration. I can find no flaw within the message. Might we request additional supplies within the letter? There is no need. Once Black Iron Isle falls, all its resources will belong to us. Wisely spoken, my lord. Neil acknowledged his own short-sightedness. Send the hawk off with the letter. Then bring me the map of North Wind Isle. Neil kept a chart in his possession. When Red Crab Isle first claimed this territory, explorers had drafted a rough survey. A copy had been entrusted to him as steward. He had hidden it away, never revealing it to Gus. Now that the isle belonged to its true ruler, Neil happily produced the document. The original map was ancient, its parchment yellowed and stiff, ink faded and smudged. Rain frowned as he studied it. Before he could voice his concern, Neil pulled a second rolled parchment from beneath his arm. I anticipated you would need an accurate chart. I spent the night redrawing it from memory. Minor inaccuracies remain, yet it matches the terrain to roughly 95% fidelity. Neil spoke calmly, quiet pride shining in his eyes at the chance to prove his worth. Well done, Master Neil. You make a capable steward. My choice to retain you in this office was wise. Rain recognized the desire for validation and offered sincere praise. Compliments cost nothing, and they encouraged loyal service. You flatter me, my lord. It is simply my duty. Neil responded with modest formality, though a smile tugged at his lips. After brief exchange, both men returned their attention to the two maps spread before them. Rain quickly spotted a key discrepancy. North Wind Isle formed a rounded rectangle, roughly 15 kilometers from north to south and 10 kilometers east to west. Terrain sloped higher in the east and fell toward the western shore. The eastern third of the land consisted of mountains, the range shaped like an oval. Ridges extended inland starting at the northeastern headland, reaching their furthest point toward the island's center, then gradually curved back toward the coastline moving south. The rest of the isle consisted of low, flat ground. Rain's settlement occupied the southwest corner, while the Murloc tribe dwelled in the southeast. Only these two stretches held wide, gentle beaches suitable for anchoring boats. Other flat areas rose steeply above sea level. Freshwater flowed down from the eastern mountains. A single river split in two partway down the slopes. Whether shaped by natural forces or ancient human work, none could say. One branch ran past Rain's settlement to the sea. The other fed the waters near the Murloc encampment. Rain suspected these two river deltas had formed the island's only usable beaches. All these features aligned on both maps. The difference lay entirely in the eastern mountain range. The old chart detailed the mountain slopes, while Neil's new drawing left a large blank space covering the terrain above the mid-mountain line. Rain pointed to the empty region. Why leave this area unmarked? Neil did not answer at once, his gaze distant with memory. When I first arrived with the Red Crab Isle expedition, I helped survey and draw this original map. We trekked across every part of the isle. I recall clearly a vast circular pool atop the highest peak. After I remained here as steward, in the summer of my second year on the isle, something happened overnight. No different from any ordinary evening, yet when dawn broke, every plant growing on the mountaintop had vanished. Everything above the mid-slope turned bare. Later, I and the remaining knights tried climbing to investigate. Once we reached that mid-mountain boundary, an invisible weight pressed down upon us, making further ascent impossible. Temperatures plummeted as we climbed. By the halfway mark, bitter cold shook our bones. I dared not guess what lay above, so I left the space blank to avoid misleading you. The tale sounded fantastical. Rain had observed the mountain coastline during his voyage around the isle, and he saw no reason for Neil to invent such a story. Such drastic environmental change in a single night, paired with that crushing aura, could scarcely be a natural occurrence. Few beings in this world wielded power great enough to reshape land on such a scale. Suspicion stirred within Rain, bringing a flicker of unease. Still, the matter would wait. Once the territory stabilized, he intended to climb those mountains himself to uncover the truth. Does my grandfather know of this? Does Baron Black Iron? The Marquis never sent hawks to maintain contact with me. Gus cared nothing for such mysteries, and I chose not to share the island's secrets with him. Neil shook his head, a hint of quiet resentment in his tone. Rain understood. No one would welcome being abandoned on a remote island by their clan. He knew fragments of the history behind it. The House of Red Crab had originally settled North Wind Isle to establish an overseas domain, where a younger family member might earn noble rank. All plans moved forward until the Grand Duke issued an order, forbidding the Marquis's kin from seeking new frontier holdings. It was plain to all that the Grand Duke sought to curb the Marquis's growing influence. As the most powerful non-royal Marquis in the realm, the noble needed to demonstrate compliance. To avoid arousing suspicion, the clan abandoned further investment in North Wind Isle, leaving it formally listed as their property, but sending no heir to govern. For various ambiguous political considerations, Rain could not bring himself to say much more to Neil. That is good. This matter is strictly confidential. No one else may learn of it. Yes, my lord. Should we issue an edict forbidding the villagers from going near that area? There is no need. It would appear far too deliberate and only arouse curiosity. Rain gently massaged the bridge of his nose. You and the knights merely need to keep watch discreetly. I understand. Once they finished discussing the map, Rain beckoned Neil closer. He held out a quill. Here, mark out the general areas of farmland across the territory for me. As you command. Neil knew the territory like the back of his hand and quickly sketched out their approximate locations. There were roughly over 1,000 mu in total, all situated around the villages. Rain's brows drew together slightly as he looked at the layout of the farmland. Neil caught this subtle expression at once and hastened to explain. Many able-bodied men were previously conscripted by Gus to burn charcoal, which is why the scale remains rather small. His explanation held true. At just 1,000 mu, there was less than 1 mu for every villager on the island. The amount of arable land was woefully insufficient. Without the aid of elven insects, typical yields of this era stood at 3 bushels harvested for every 1 bushel sown. And for at best, even with composting techniques in use, yields topped out at roughly 200 gene per mu. Without high-quality grain seeds and superior fertilizer, relying solely on farmyard manure left the soil lacking fertility. Lands had to be rotated under the 3-field or 4-field system. To sustain a family of 5, a household required no fewer than 20 mu of actively cultivated land. When accounting for 10 mu left fallow under the 3-field rotation system, each household ought to have access to at least 30 mu of farmland in total. This arrangement allowed 20 mu to be farmed while 10 rested to replenish nutrients, enough to support 1 household of villagers. There was therefore a massive shortfall of farmland on the island, a genuine problem. Yet Rain knew the island's history well, and this was no fault of Neil or the villagers. That was not why he had frowned at the extent of the cultivated land.